Oh. All right. Hey. Good morning. Welcome to the May 2019 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, could you please announce our agenda for the morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 6 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a memorandum opinion and order that would deny the application of China Mobile USA for a Section 214 authorization to provide international telecommunication services between the United States and foreign destinations. Second, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that would seek comment on reallocating spectrum in the 1675 to 1680 megahertz band for shared use between incumbent federal operations and non-federal fixed or mobile, except aeronautical mobile operations. Third, you will consider a report and order that would adopt streamlined rules relating to interference caused by FM translators and expedite the translator interference complaint resolution process. Fourth, you will consider a public notice seeking comment on proposed procedures for conducting and participating in an auction of toll-free numbers in the 833 code. Fifth, you will consider a memorandum opinion and order and authorization that would grant FIA's request to deploy and operate a proposed non-geostationary satellite constellation to provide Earth imaging services around the world. Sixth, you will consider a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking that would adopt measures and seek comment on others to improve video relay service, expand access to direct video communications, and protect the VRS program against waste, fraud, and abuse. This is your agenda for today. Please note, item 5 listed in the May 2nd, 2019 Sunshine Notice entitled Assessment and Collection of Regulatory Fees for Fiscal Year 2019 was adopted by the Commission and deleted from today's agenda. The first item, entitled China Mobile International USA, Inc., Application for Global Facilities-Based and Global Resale International Telecommunications Authority, pursuant to Section 214 of the Communications Act, as amended, 1934, will be presented by the International Bureau, and Tom Sullivan, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief Sullivan, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, and a special welcome and congratulations to Commissioner Starks, as this is the first time the Bureau is presenting before you. Thank you. China Mobile USA has requested authority to provide telecommunication services between the United States and foreign destinations. The Commission, in adopting its 1997 open entry policy for foreign investment into the U.S. telecommunications market, also determined that it would seek the expertise of the relevant executive branch agencies on any national security, law enforcement, foreign policy, or trade policy concerns. This is the first time the executive branch agencies have asked the Commission to deny an application on national security and law enforcement grounds. The item finds that grant of the application would raise substantial and serious national security and law enforcement risks that cannot be addressed through a mitigation agreement, and thus would not be in the public interest. I would like to thank all of the IB staff, as well as our colleagues from the Office of General Counsel, the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, the Office of Economics and Analysis, and the Office of Managing Director for their work on this item. Joining me at the table today are Troy Tanner, Kate Collins, David Kretsch, and Kimberly Cook. Kim will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. China Mobile USA is a Delaware corporation that is indirectly and ultimately owned and controlled by the Chinese government. In 2011, China Mobile USA filed an application requesting authority under Section 214 of the Act and Section 6318 of the Commission's rules to provide international facilities-based and resale services between the U.S. and foreign destinations. In 2018, after a lengthy review of the application, discussions with the applicant, and consultation with the U.S. intelligence community, the executive branch agencies recommended that the Commission deny China Mobile USA's application. The record in this proceeding includes publicly available, business confidential, and classified information. The draft memorandum opinion and order concludes that the unclassified information alone is sufficient to support the findings and decision in the order. We discuss only publicly available information here. In addition, there is a classified supplement that discusses how the classified information further supports the findings and decision. Relying on the unclassified record, the draft order finds that due to a number of factors related to China Mobile USA's ownership and control by the Chinese government, grant to the application would raise substantial and serious national security and law enforcement risks that cannot be addressed through a mitigation agreement. Specifically, the draft order finds that China Mobile USA is vulnerable to exploitation, influence, and control by the Chinese government. The order notes that there is substantial risk that the Chinese government would exert even greater control over China Mobile and China Mobile USA than over other state-owned enterprises that, given the Chinese government's 100% ownership of China Mobile, the size and reach of China Mobile and its subsidiaries, and the importance of and opportunities afforded by the telecommunication services offered both within China and globally. The order would further find that granted the international Section 214 authorization would produce substantial and serious national security and law enforcement risks. Of note, foreign government control of a U.S. carrier in and of itself is not grounds for denial of an international Section 214 authorization. Indeed, the Commission has previously granted such authorizations. However, in the instant case, the executive branch agencies identify significantly enhanced national security and law enforcement risks linked to the Chinese government's activities since the Commission last granted international authorizations to other Chinese state-owned companies more than a decade ago. As a consequence, they advise that the risks associated with granting an international 214 authorization to China Mobile USA are different and heightened and raise special concerns due to the size and technical and financial resources of China Mobile USA's parent company and its subsidiaries. The executive branch agencies assess that the Chinese government could use China Mobile USA's common carrier status to exploit the public switch telephone network in the United States and increase intelligence collection against U.S. government agencies and other sensitive targets that depend on that network. As a common carrier, China Mobile would have a greater ability to monitor, degrade, and disrupt U.S. government communications. Based on the record evidence, the draft order concludes that there are valid national security and law enforcement concerns that apply to China Mobile's application. The draft order additionally finds that the substantial and serious national security and law enforcement risks cannot be mitigated through a voluntary agreement. Through an extensive process, the executive branch agencies have determined that the national security and law enforcement risks presented by granting China Mobile USA an international Section 214 authorization cannot be resolved through a mitigation agreement in the current national security environment. They note that mitigation agreements are only as strong as the U.S. government's ability to enforce their terms. As such, the executive branch relies on a baseline level of trust when working with telecommunications carriers due to the sensitivity of national security and law enforcement investigations. In this regard, because China Mobile USA is subject to exploitation, influence, and control by the Chinese government, China Mobile USA could, at the behest of the Chinese government, violate the mitigation agreement and not self-report as it may be required to do under Chinese law. Given the evidence in the record, the order would find that the underlying foundation of trust that is needed for a mitigation agreement to adequately address national security and law enforcement concerns is not present in the instant case. Thus, for the purpose of the Commission's public interest analysis in this proceeding, the order would find that absent the ability to mitigate, any Commission grant of China Mobile USA's application to provide global facilities-based and resale service on U.S. international routes would not serve the public interest. Therefore, the memorandum opinion and order would deny China Mobile USA's application for international Section 214 authority. The International Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cook, for that presentation. We will now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize to my colleagues. I have a long statement, and I have an even longer one for the record. So, those who follow FCC proceedings may notice that I often start or finish meeting items by saying that I'm pleased to support this or that order, NPRM, or public notice under consideration. While I will vote in favor of today's item, I do not derive any joy from doing so given the weighty nature of this issue. As a fierce supporter of promoting competition, permitting foreign ownership, and facilitating open markets, I nonetheless find the situation confronting us to be extremely serious, and the action we take to block China Mobile from accessing the U.S. telecommunications market to be a necessary step, drastic as it may be. Being a fervent free trader, I strongly believe that participating in open markets comes with corresponding obligations to comport within established norms. That principle applies to all countries and providers, irrespective of their domestic form of government. As I read it, our action today is consistent with a speech I gave 2 weeks ago discussing the many fundamental concerns I have about Chinese government attempts to monopolize 5G development and deployment. One basic reality should go undisputed. There is nearly zero daylight between the Communist government of China and its companies. They use unfair advantages in an effort to take a dominant position in 5G and expand the reach of their networks and equipment. By providing improper government subsidies, throwing cheap labor at service projects, and stealing intellectual property, among other unsavory and illegal tactics, China effectively offers competitive products and services below cost, allowing wireless providers and manufacturers to gain market share not only in China but internationally. Further, one pervasive presence of Chinese equipment and providers in a nation's communications marketplace places these countries' national security at risk. Today's order sets forth a convincing case for why permitting China Mobile to provide telecommunications services between the U.S. and foreign locations is not in the public interest. As part of this process, the Commission sought input from the national security, law enforcement, and foreign and trade policy experts that comprise what is known as Team Telecom. Team Telecom found substantial national security and law enforcement risks that could not be mitigated and requested that the Commission deny the application. While the Commission performs its own review, I acknowledge the expertise of these executive branch agencies when it comes to national security issues, recognizing the value of their work and agree with their conclusion. I appreciate the collective insight they provided to this important matter. At the same time, there is little dispute that Team Telecom must improve the transparency and timeliness of their decisions. By way of background, this particular application was filed on September 1, 2011, and NTIA didn't file its recommendation to deny on behalf of Team Telecom until July 2018. I understand that these issues are complex, but all applicants deserve timely responses, and this decision, while inevitable, was far from timely. Luckily, those on the inside of Team Telecom are finally recognizing some of the deficiencies in the process. Recently, a lead figure within the Department of Justice's National Security Division, which is a key member of Team Telecom, stated publicly that we must reform the ad hoc process by which the executive branch advises the FCC licenses in order to explore ways to make this process more efficient and expedient so that the executive branch never again takes nearly 7 years to make a recommendation. Of note, I have been calling for Team Telecom reform since 2015 and worked closely with former Chairman Tom Wheeler on a proceeding to adopt deadlines and enhance transparency, only to have him inexplicably pull the plug a day or two after the 2016 election. I strongly believe in codifying the structure of Team Telecom and streamlining its procedures, and this can be done without jeopardizing our national security or undermining our ability to protect U.S. interests. I look forward to further action on this matter, whether internally at the FCC or by the administration itself. Finally, certain perpetual critics have taken today's item as an opportunity to suggest that, while it's nice for the Commission to take the step to ensure our national security, it is not done enough to impose strict network security regulations on the provision of 5G wireless services. Some may even go further and demand that today's order affirmatively mandate new burdens to address general issues regarding 5G security. That is an intentional attempt to conflate issues and mangle the situation. Today's order considers the national security implications raised by China Mobile's International 214 application. This is not a rulemaking of general applicability, but a fact-specific adjudication raised by one individual entity's request. In other words, a particular application may have significant implications for national security, but it does not form the basis for taking far-reaching action. A consideration of national security implications is certainly within the Commission's authority when considering licenses with significant foreign investment, and it is consistent with the FCC's Section 214 review process. But the question of how to secure the nation's communications network is a broader matter, distinct from the issues we consider today. Separately, I would note that American wireless providers have been working hard to ensure robust security as part of their 5G offerings, including through the standards process. These entities appreciate that security is critical to consumers and end users' comfort and willingness to use their underlying networks. Thanks to competition, providers have the incentive to provide the most secure networks possible. Moreover, Congress has time and time again decided that network security issues are to be decided and led and handled by other federal agencies, particularly the Department of Homeland Security. Shoehorning network security into the Commission's jurisdiction amounts to a misreading of the statute and ignores congressional intent. If, in the future, Congress decides that the Commission should have this authority, I'll be more than happy to take up this issue. In the end, the action we take today is justified. If circumstances change substantially, I'm sure the Commission will have the opportunity to revisit the matter as appropriate. I thank the Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. The free market is building the next generation of communications networks in America. Broadband providers have invested $1.6 trillion in connecting households to fast internet. And wireless carriers are spending more than $30 billion per year to upgrade to 5G. Investors are willing to put that astonishing amount of capital at risk to serve American families because of the open system that we have. Our economy is vibrant because people around the globe have confidence that we'll uphold the rule of law. The U.S. is the top destination for foreign direct investment, attracting $4 trillion, money used to employ our scientists in R&D, our tradesmen in construction, and our farmers in their effort to feed the world. If you play by the rules here, we welcome your business. That commitment has been at the foundation of our success as a country. And so in telecom, we don't have nationalized networks. The government's role is to encourage all comers to invest, to build, and to serve Americans, so long as they play by the rules. The government acts as the referee, not the star player. And in this case, it's imperative that we blow the whistle. When a company seeks authorization to integrate itself into our communications network, our security review must consider at least 3 questions. First, how much control can a foreign actor exert over the company? Second, what evidence do we have about the foreign actor's desire to exercise that control? And third, if the foreign actor were to act on its malintent, what's the scope of the threat that the specific authorization poses? Here, the answer to the first question is clear. The People's Republic of China owns China Mobile. The Chinese government controls its management and can direct its actions. Compounding its control by ownership, the Chinese government can compel access to telecom facilities within China on demand. China's 2017 National Intelligence Law mandates that, quote, all organizations and citizens support, assist, and cooperate with national intelligence efforts in accordance with law. We understand that this vague dictate places Chinese telecoms and their customers under routine and secret surveillance by the People's Republic of China. Second, we have substantial evidence that the Chinese government intends to surveil persons within our borders for government security and spying advantage, as well as for intellectual property and a business edge. Just this week, the New York Times reported that hackers working for the Chinese government stole some of our government's most important cybersecurity tools and repurposed them to attack Western allies and businesses. The Chinese reportedly targeted an ally's telecom network. And when the tools were later transferred to North Korea and Russia, those governments crippled British hospitals and shipping companies. And they even shut down a Ukrainian airport, its postal service, gas station, and ATMs, according to the report. There's little doubt the Chinese government would value additional direct access to our telecom networks for reasons contrary to our security interests. Third, we must assess the scope of the U.S. authorization at issue. In this case, the Chinese government, through China Mobile, proposes to carry traffic from our shores to international destinations. The purported business plan is to provide low-cost calls between the U.S. and China. At first blush, this looks like a narrow authorization. Interconnection is not integration, after all. And in any case, we may assume some security risk whenever traffic goes abroad. And that reasoning might be dispositive if interconnection were that simple. But due to least cost routing, a customer may not be able to choose which company carries the traffic. And once on a particular carrier, the traffic can follow a path of that carrier's choosing. That's what security researchers discovered in November when internet traffic originating in Los Angeles and destined for Washington, D.C., was sent on a detour through Hangzhou, China. The Chinese government owns the company that directed traffic along that puzzling LA to Hangzhou to DC route. So the evidence in this case is clear. After a multi-year inquiry spanning 2 administrations, the executive branch agencies recommended that we deny China Mobile's application due to security and law enforcement concerns, the first such recommendation ever. The record here supports that outcome. In fact, the evidence before us suggests that we should go even further. The Chinese government owns a number of other carriers that are already operating in the U.S., including China Unicom and China Telecom. Those companies hold the same Section 214 authorizations that China Mobile sought here. The evidence I've seen in this case calls those existing authorizations into question. For instance, the decision today cites reports that China Telecom has been hijacking U.S. traffic and redirecting it through China. So it's time for the U.S. to take additional action. Our national security agencies should examine whether the FCC should revoke those existing Section 214 authorizations, and the FCC should open a proceeding on those matters. Security threats have evolved over the many years since those companies were granted interconnection rights back in the early 2000s. Much, if not all, of the reasoning behind today's decision applies with equal or greater force to those legacy authorizations. So let's ensure that our decisions from decades past don't inadvertently endanger American interests. I want to thank the International Bureau for its hard work on this item. I thank Team Telecom for its input, and the item has my support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Here's a hard truth. Today, no communications system is ever fully secure. To understand why requires a bit of history. For most of the 20th century, communications in the United States was synonymous with one company, which we affectionately knew as Ma Bell. That company's monopoly status meant that it controlled all aspects of security for the public switched telephone network. Moreover, communications traffic traveled by and large over buried cable, which provided a degree of physical protection from intrusion. Then, in 1984, courtesy of a court decision, we introduced competition to the communications landscape. Lower prices and greater innovation followed. But this move also multiplied the number of actors and exponentially increased our security challenges. The rise of consumer wireless communications came a bit later. And because wireless signals spread as they travel, they are easier to intercept. On top of this, the reliance on cell phone towers made it easy for bad actors to target network providers. Even today, Many of these structures have limited physical security. But the most profound change of all may be the rise of the internet. As our lives migrated online, our communications combined control and content into a single channel, vastly simplifying the ability to attack a network and its users. Today, the internet underlies nearly every facet of our lives and is the foundation for much of the critical infrastructure that keeps our country running. But all of this activity is vulnerable to malicious software, denial of service attacks, form jacking, phishing, and a growing range of applications vulnerabilities. Billions of people were affected by cyber attacks last year, and those numbers are only going to grow. So I started with a hard truth about our communications networks, that given the powerful complexity of modern communications, no system today is ever fully secure. But that does not excuse us from working to improve the strength and resiliency of our networks. History demonstrates that as communications capabilities evolve, so do their security risks. It is imperative that we make security a priority here and build it into everything we do. So here's another hard truth. The Federal Communications Commission is doing too little to address the vast challenges of network security and safety. I believe the first duty of the public servant is the public safety, and on that score, we have work to do. Please don't get confused by the performative security associated with this decision. This application has been in these halls for more than 8 years. It has been on permanent pause. So while I support this vote, it does nothing to change the status quo, nor does it address any of the fundamental challenges to the security of digital age communications. To move beyond performative security to real security, this agency needs to change course. This is the right moment to do it. We are at an inflection point as the world races to deploy next-generation wireless networks. With 5G service, we will have wireless capability built into the world around us. This will provide a whole new range of opportunities for civic and commercial life. But as they multiply, this will vastly expand our surface exposure to risk. It is no longer enough for the United States to be first to 5G. If we want to ensure our continued technology leadership, the networks we deploy must be secure. In a speech at the start of this year at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, I offered 3 ideas about just where the FCC can begin. First, I suggested that the agency needs to recharter and reinvigorate the Communications, Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council and give it a new focus on 5G security. This needs to include more study on security technologies to reduce risks from the Internet of Things, more study on network function virtualization to reduce denial of service attacks, and a new study on supply chain risk management that recommends specific mitigation techniques. Today, a bipartisan group of members from the House of Representatives sent this agency a letter calling for just this approach with the next iteration of this council. I support it, and I hope my colleagues will follow my lead. Second, late last year, the Department of Homeland Security announced the creation of the nation's first Information and Communications Technology Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force. This group is charged with developing national recommendations to identify and manage risk in the global supply chain for communications. The task force includes officials from the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, Department of Treasury, General Services Administration, Department of Justice, Department of Commerce, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and the Social Security Administration. In addition, there is expertise from industry with representatives from communications carriers, equipment manufacturers, and cybersecurity companies. It's an impressive list, to be sure. But there's one agency that is missing. The FCC needs a prominent seat at this table. Leaving the agency with primary oversight over communications out is neither prudent nor wise. Good things come to those who ask. So it is time for this agency to insist that one of the individuals on this dais join the leadership of this effort. Moreover, the work of this forum should inform our ongoing proceeding concerning equipment supported by universal service funds. Third, the agency needs to make cyber hygiene a priority. To keep our communication systems functioning, we are going to need routine practices that increase security and reduce exposure to attack. The agency must build these policies into its day-to-day work. As the number of devices using radio frequency expands with the Internet of Things, this agency should use its equipment authorization process to encourage device manufacturers to build security into new products. On top of this, the agency could ask that as a condition of holding public license, licensees certify that they have implemented the best practices for 5G security. This could include a commitment to using the National Institute of Standards of Technology, well-known cybersecurity framework. While we're at it, we need to do more to educate citizens about cyber hygiene. We must increase our outreach with consumers and consumer groups on the basics of cyber hygiene, from downloading software upgrades for devices to assessing connection security when using unlicensed airwaves. Finally, the honest truth is that we have failed the public when it comes to the privacy and security of wireless devices. Reporting last year and earlier this year indicated that for just a few hundred dollars, a range of shady middlemen can tell you where any wireless phone is being used within a few hundred meters. Going forward, the potential for abuse is frightening. Remember, new wireless devices will be in our homes, from smart thermostats to virtual assistants to televisions with cameras and microphones. They will be outdoors, from smart electricity grids to adaptive traffic signals. They will be in our cars, sensing engine operation and location. And they will inform the way we work, shop, seek healthcare, and engage with the world around us. Yet this agency has been totally silent when it comes to what happened that resulted in location aggregators getting this information from wireless carriers and making it available for purchase. This is an issue of personal and national security. This agency owes it to the American public to explain just what is going on with the privacy of our wireless devices. Now, hard truths can be uncomfortable, but our history shows that if we acknowledge them, they can be a call to action. I think it is time for this agency to act like network security and consumer privacy is a priority, and I hope my colleagues are ready to change course and make this happen.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is a truism to state that we live in an interconnected world. But the security environment of today is very different from what we had before the '96 Act, in which a limited number of well-established carriers interconnected with each other. Network security in those days was primarily based on simple trust, not unlike neighbors in a small town that leave their back doors open. All the players knew each other, and so there wasn't much of a risk of folks acting maliciously. As the communications technology has evolved and new parties have entered the network, the telecom neighborhood has become larger and more dangerous. While the great majority of newer network participants uphold the high security standards followed by the original small group of trusted entities, that low security trust-based environment has become more nostalgic than it is practical. Numerous opportunistic bad actors have ready access to network credentials that were once limited to trusted entities. And as the executive branch agencies state in their recommendation regarding the application at issue here, quote, "This network was created with minimal security features because it was assumed that only trusted parties would have access. However, this lack of security features has led to law enforcement and national security vulnerabilities, such as giving an entity with access the ability to target, alter, block, and reroute traffic," close quote. This very morning, the Commission received a letter from a bipartisan leadership of the House Energy and Commerce Committee urging the Commission to look at the security of the 5G network. And I agree that this is a critical question, and that's why I reviewed this item not only for what's at stake in this proceeding, but for what we should do more going forward. And here's what I'm thinking. Given our growing reliance on communications networks to support our critical infrastructure, transportation, healthcare, and the financial sector, The need for strong Commission action to address these security vulnerabilities has never been greater. Our authority is clear, beginning with Congress's explanation in Section 1 of the Communications Act of 1934. And Chairman Pallone, Ranking Member Walden, Chairman Doyle, and Ranking Member Latta cite this provision in describing the FCC's role on this issue. Their letter states, open quote, Congress has empowered the FCC to, among other things, ensure that the country's communications network are being used for national defense and promotion of safety and property, close quote. I know it has been suggested that Section 1 is merely a policy statement, but the Commission has long relied upon it in informing the public interest analyses performed in numerous circumstances under both Democratic and Republican leadership, including the Section 214 proceedings like the one before us today, in consideration of proposed transfers of broadcast and wireless licenses, and in the supply chain NPRM adopted by the Commission last year. Nor does our authority stop here. The Act expressly gives the Commission the authority to perform, quote, any and all acts, make such rules and regulations, and issue such orders not inconsistent with the Act as may be necessary in the execution of its functions, close quote. Protecting our networks from persistent and potentially catastrophic security threats is the essence of necessary to me. Congress has also specifically required the Commission to ensure that both carriers and cable operators protect confidentiality of their customers' data. I will therefore approach any matters raising national security and concerns with this authority in mind. Any such proceeding, I will review the record before me and independently assess the proposed outcome protects the national defense and security of life and property. And having come from the Department of Justice, and I see some of my National Security Division colleagues here today, I greatly respect the expertise of the executive branch and will carefully review and consider their views and any intelligence that they acquire. Nevertheless, this agency must exercise its own judgment in light of our congressional responsibilities. We come to the China Mobile application for international Section 214 authority here today. And as the item states, with a Section 214 authorization, China Mobile would be able to connect to U.S. telecom networks and gain enhanced access to our telephone lines, fiber optic cable, cellular networks, and communication satellites. If it offers the least costly path to carry traffic on a particular route, China Mobile could, in fact, even end up carrying the communications of U.S. government agencies. In light of the national security concerns convincingly raised here by the executive branch agencies and China Mobile's failure to allay those concerns to me, I fully support this item. But we have more work to do, I believe, if we are to fulfill our statutory duty to protect our telecommunications networks. First, as the decision acknowledges, earlier commissions granted international 214 authority to other carriers with similar ownership structures to that of China Mobile. The executive branch, its agencies underscore how national security environment has changed since those applications were originally granted, and that the risks associated with granting China Mobile's applications are now heightened. It is a top priority for me to address the similar concerns executive branch agencies may have with those other carriers. My colleagues and I should work, as Commissioner Carr mentioned, to do this important and statutorily required work. Second, as noted earlier, a little more than 1 year ago, the Commission proposed to prohibit the use of USF funds for the purchase of equipment or services from any company that poses a national security threat to the integrity of our U.S. telecommunications networks or the communications supply chain. While the NPRM applies only prospectively and does not require the elimination of existing equipment, Congress subsequently passed the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which expressly prohibits agencies, including the FCC, from obligating or expending loan or grant funds to procure or obtain equipment, services, or systems that telecom equipment by specified Chinese companies under those conditions. I firmly believe that the same security concerns raised here today are presented wherever this equipment is currently in our network. We are charged to act quickly, to identify those potential risks, take the appropriate remedial action, and ensure that we address the needs of small rural carriers that may have this Chinese equipment in their systems. Our national security demands that we act decisively. Finally, and more broadly, I believe the Commission needs to do more to protect our security in the networks. As I noted earlier, Congress has charged our agency with this role. And while we may share this with our federal partners, this agency still has core responsibilities and expertise to ensure that carriers comprehensively protect the security of our telecommunication networks. As the CISRIC has noted, both legacy and new networking systems are vulnerable to exploits like location tracking, interception, denial of service attacks, account fraud, and modification. And while the private sector on these issues, private sector action is very laudable, the Commission also needs to do more than cheer from the sidelines. We know that more steps to securing our network is needed. According to DHS, all the U.S. networks are vulnerable to surveillance by exploiting flaws in the SS7 authentication and authorization system. Another study reports that 1 in 3 networks is at risk of fraud attacks like the scams, where someone fools the network into forwarding them your bank's texts, which can confirm a big withdrawal. In light of these circumstances, the Commission needs to answer some questions in my mind. First, how do we address the continued operation of legacy 2G and 3G networks with known cybersecurity flaws, and given that these networks can be used as entry points for attacks on our current networks? Are there particular vulnerabilities to rural and low-income consumers who also use those legacy networks? Second, what measures can we take to ensure that all carriers properly utilize security measures available in state-of-the-art networks? Third, how do we ensure that communication networks that receive universal service support, government dollars, or that carry federal government communications are protected against security threats? And then finally, as the House E&C leadership has requested, how do we identify and fix security flaws in the 5G? Finally, as noted above, our communication networks are already underpinning utilities, transportation, the financial system, and healthcare. With this comes a great responsibility. As we move into a world of 5G and the Internet of Things, our networks are growing larger and more interconnected than ever. Real risks and potential harm of telecom network vulnerabilities are also growing exponentially. The days when our telecom networks could be likened to that small town organized around neighborly trust are unfortunately long gone. We're in a new neighborhood where there are threats, but also opportunities, and the Commission's policies need to reflect that new reality. I plan to be a strong voice for such change. Thank you to the International Bureau for your excellent work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner Starks. Last week, I was honored to be part of the United States delegation to an international conference on 5G network security hosted by the Czech Republic. There was a broad consensus at the conference that network security is not only a priority, but a necessity. And through close collaboration among over 30 nations, the conference produced a set of 5G security principles that reflect the common understanding that the security of 5G networks is crucial for national security, economic security, and other national interests and global stability. This was a major accomplishment and concrete evidence of the progress the administration has made on the international stage on this issue. The work we are doing here at home also is vital to ensuring that wireless networks are safe and secure. Along those lines, I joined several other administration officials just yesterday in a detailed, multi-hour briefing of members of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. While I can't discuss what transpired at the meeting, I can say that at the intersection of national security and communications lies a strong bipartisan consensus in favor of proactive measures to protect our networks at the front end, not as an afterthought. Another facet of the FCC's domestic work involves ensuring that foreign entities seeking to provide telecommunications services in the United States do not pose a risk to our national security. And that brings us to the matter at hand. In 2011, China Mobile USA applied to the FCC seeking to provide international telecommunications services in the United States. As we normally do, we asked the executive branch for its views on the application. After a lengthy review process, the executive branch last year recommended that we deny the application for national security and law enforcement reasons. And after carefully reviewing the record, I agree that rejecting China Mobile's application is the right call. Simply put, granting China Mobile's application would not be in the public interest. China Mobile ultimately is owned and controlled by the Chinese government. And that makes it vulnerable to exploitation, influence, and control by that government. And in the current security environment, which features Chinese government involvement in computer intrusions and economic espionage, there is a significant risk that the Chinese government would use China Mobile to conduct activities that would seriously jeopardize the national security, law enforcement, and economic interests of the United States. Among other things, if this application were granted, the Chinese government could use China Mobile to exploit our telephone network in order to increase intelligence collection against U.S. government agencies and other sensitive targets that depend on this network. This is a flatly unacceptable risk. I will put it plainly. When it comes to our national security, we cannot afford to make risky choices and just hope for the best. We must have a clear-eyed view of the threats that we face and be prepared to do what is necessary to counter those threats. That is exactly what the Commission is doing today in denying China Mobile's application. A quick word about the Commission's Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council. Before the letter referenced by my colleagues was sent, I had already directed staff to ensure that the next CISRIC would have a working group dedicated to 5G security. I'm pleased to see that my colleagues and the elected officials who signed the letter agree with my approach and appreciate their support for the Commission's efforts on this score. In closing, I would like to thank the executive branch agencies that provided us with their feedback, as well as the FCC staff who worked on this item, from the International Bureau, the Office of General Counsel, the Office of Economics and Analytics, the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, and the Office of the Managing Director. We will then proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Approve.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is granted, with editorial privileges granted as well. Thanks for this great work by the staff. Madam Secretary, could you please take us to item number 2 on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, the next item will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau and is entitled Allocation and Service Rules for the 1675 to 1680 megahertz band. Donald Stockdale, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief Stockdale, if you and your team are ready, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I am pleased to present to you the 1675 to 1680 megahertz band notice of proposed rulemaking. I am joined at the table today by Roger Noel, Lloyd Coward, and Anna Gentry, all of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. In addition to the staff at the table, I would like to thank the Commission staff listed on the slide. Anna will now present the item.
Thank you, Don. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Morning.
The notice of proposed rulemaking presented for your consideration today would take key steps towards making additional spectrum available for flexible wireless non-federal use in the 1675 to 1680 megahertz band. In doing so, this item would further the Commission's efforts to keep pace with ever-increasing demand for spectrum to support the next generation of wireless broadband networks, and is an important step in the broader government efforts to introduce more spectrum into the marketplace while protecting incumbent federal users. The notice of proposed rulemaking would propose to reallocate the 1675 to 1680 megahertz band for shared use between incumbent federal operations and new non-federal users. Existing federal users in this band currently use the spectrum to provide weather forecasting and monitoring services. The item would propose that any new non-federal users be required to protect incumbent federal operations and would seek comment on the appropriate sharing mechanisms necessary to facilitate successful federal and non-federal use. The notice of proposed rulemaking would encourage commenters to discuss the tools, technical limitations, and other steps necessary to protect incumbent federal operations while making this spectrum available for new non-federal uses. In order to provide flexibility to licensees and promote efficient spectrum use, the item would propose to issue any licenses in this band on a geographic basis through competitive bidding. Finally, the notice of proposed rulemaking would propose service and technical rules designed to promote efficient and intensive use by any new non-federal services in the band. The accompanying order would correct certain typographical errors in Section 27.53 of the Commission's rules to provide correct cross-references to the Commission's emission limits measurement procedures applicable to certain Part 27 services. The Wireless Telecommunications Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges to make technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gentry. Before I turn it over to Commissioner O'Reilly, I have to say that while the substance of your presentation was compelling, did you memorize that? That was unbelievable. That was truly unbelievable. Well done. I was about to turn around and look at the teleprompter, but I didn't want to make a scene. That was amazing. So, bravo. Bravissimo. Sorry to steal your thunder, Commissioner, but I just have to recognize Ms. Gentry for the presentation.
Totally understandable. No statement from me. Thank you.
Wow, shocked us into silence. All right. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. Under this FCC's leadership, the Commission has focused on winning the race to 5G by modernizing our rules to reflect new technology. Our reforms have centered on two areas, infrastructure and spectrum. On infrastructure, our old rules were written for 200-foot macro towers, when we know that 5G will require millions of new small cells to densify the network. So in March of last year, we updated the federal rules governing small cell builds, and in September, we set reasonable fee and time limits on the local approval process. The results? The U.S. has leapfrogged our global competitors. We now have the world's largest 5G build-out. Now, that may not sit well with the naysayers who are convinced we're losing to China, but the fact is the U.S. will have 92 5G builds by year's end, while China has announced plans for 0. On spectrum, the race to 5G can only be won with an all-of-the-above approach, high, mid, and low-band spectrum. On high band, we completed the first millimeter wave auction in the world in January. We'll finish our work on 24 gigahertz later this month, and then we'll move on to auction 37, 39, and 47 gigahertz later this year. On low band, we completed the 600 megahertz incentive auction in 2017. We're overseeing the repack of broadcasters currently, and we move forward on 900 megahertz, which brings us to the mid-band. In 2017, one of the first actions the new FCC took was to launch a rulemaking to look at mid-band spectrum from 3 gigahertz all the way up. There were plenty of people who didn't see mid-band as a top priority back then, and they questioned whether our efforts to identify large swaths of 5G spectrum in these bands would bear fruit. And the FCC's progress since then has helped change that narrative. On 3.5 gigahertz, Commissioner O'Reilly led the agency's efforts to ensure that this mid-band spectrum will work in the real world. On 2.5 gigahertz, the chairman advanced a plan that could unlock nearly 200 megahertz of prime mid-band spectrum. In the 5 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz bands, the chairman has moved quickly with concrete steps that could free up hundreds of megahertz of spectrum. On the C-band, 3.7 gigahertz to 4.2 gigahertz, I put forward my thoughts in a speech 2 months ago, and just last week, the agency put out a notice that seeks focused comment. Today, we continue that 2.5-year effort to free up prime mid-band spectrum. The 5 megahertz before us is a small sliver of spectrum, to be sure, but if it's combined with adjacent and nearby channels, we could have a 40 megahertz block that offers high throughput at great distance. And those are excellent characteristics for next-gen mobile broadband. I remain confident that with the continued hard work and our all-of-the-above spectrum strategy, America will win the race to 5G, and this item is one step towards the finish line. It has my support. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Today's rulemaking begins a proceeding to make a bit of spectrum in the 1675 to 1680 megahertz band available for shared use. This will take place only after the completion of a government study and an auction that is not yet scheduled. The issues associated with this 5 megahertz of spectrum have been kicking around these halls for more than 5 years, so it has my support. But I'm afraid this small movement involving a small block of mid-band spectrum does not change a basic truth. The United States has a mid-band spectrum problem. Over the past 2 years, this agency has flooded private markets with high-band airwaves. But this country is increasingly alone in its mission to make millimeter wave spectrum the core of its domestic 5G wireless approach. This means we have internationally ceded leadership when it comes to mid-band airwaves. And if you want evidence this is true, well, it's all around us. Start with South Korea, which last year wrapped up an auction of the 3.5 gigahertz band. At roughly the same time, Spain and Italy held auctions for the 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz band. Austria did the same with similar airwaves earlier this year. Switzerland, Germany, Japan, they've all auctioned a range of mid-band spectrum just a few months ago. Meanwhile, China has already allocated 300 megahertz of spectrum of mid-band spectrum for next-generation mobile use. In the United States, we have made available 0. This is a problem. If we continue our current path prioritizing millimeter wave, we may find ourselves without a global supply base as mid-band becomes the core of worldwide 5G service. This means less scale, higher costs, interoperability challenges, and less security as other nations' technologies proliferate. Moreover, recent commercial launches of 5G service in the United States are confirming what we already know, that commercializing millimeter wave is not easy given its propagation challenges. The network densification these airwaves require is costly and, in fact, may never reach rural America. It's time for the United States to flip its wireless priorities and pivot to mid-band spectrum. These airwaves offer the mix of capacity and coverage we need for 5G to ever be deployed nationwide. This means scheduling an auction of the 3.5 gigahertz band and developing auction rules. It means moving faster on a plan for the 3.4 to 4.2 gigahertz band. And we should explore innovative opportunities for making more efficient use of the 2.5 gigahertz band. Plus, we need to press our federal partners to work collaboratively with us to open more mid-band spectrum for new commercial use. But above all, we need to recognize that what we do here today with a discrete 5 megahertz of mid-band spectrum is not enough. Our national leadership is at stake, and it's time to pivot our priorities so that the next generation of wireless service can truly reach every community across the country.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
We'll submit a statement for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Commissioner. For 4 years under the prior administration, the President's budget proposed that the FCC take action to make mid-band spectrum, specifically spectrum in the 1675 to 1680 megahertz band, available for flexible use, subject to sharing arrangements with federal weather satellites. But nothing happened. It was all talk, no action. Under this administration, things have changed. In 2017, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration began a study of spectrum sharing in the 1675 to 1680 megahertz band. And now, this commission is proposing to make this band available for flexible use, subject to sharing arrangements with federal weather satellites. Our goal is to free up more spectrum for wireless broadband, while also including safeguards to ensure that any new commercial operations don't result in harmful interference to incumbent federal operators. Of course, our consideration of how best to accomplish these objectives will be informed by the results of NOAA's study. Now, our action today is just another example of our aggressive, all-of-the-above strategy to free up spectrum for commercial use. In January, we finished an auction of spectrum in the 28 gigahertz band. We are currently conducting an auction of the 24 gigahertz band. We recently announced that on December 10th, we will be launching a single auction of 3,400 megahertz of spectrum in the upper 37, 39, and 47 gigahertz bands, which will be the largest spectrum auction in American history. We've also been working to repurpose mid-band spectrum for 5G, from rulemakings to free up spectrum in the 2.5 gigahertz, 3.7 gigahertz, 4.9 gigahertz, and 6 gigahertz bands, to our upcoming auction in the 3.5 gigahertz band, to ongoing work with our federal partners to share the 3.1 gigahertz, 3.45 gigahertz, and 5.9 gigahertz bands. In the past 2 years, we have put over 2,500 megahertz of prime mid-band spectrum on the table for high-speed wireless broadband. All of these accomplishments on airwaves would not have been possible without the labors of our talented staff. And in particular, I would like to thank the following for their work on this item: Lloyd Coward, Anna Gentry, with apologies for not memorizing this list, Joyce Jones, Charles Mathias, Roger Knoll, Paul Powell, Becky Schwartz, Dana Schaefer, and Cecilia Soloff from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Nicholas Copeland, Catherine Travis, Julia McHenry, Gary Michaels, and Emily Talaga from the Office of Economics and Analytics, Paul Murray and Ron Rapazzi from the Office of Engineering and Technology, Deborah Broderson, David Horowitz, and Bill Richardson from the Office of General Counsel, and Shauna Wilkerson from the Office of Communications Business Opportunities. I look forward to working with all of you and our federal counterparts in the months to come so we can bring this rulemaking to a prompt resolution. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Riley?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Approve.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is granted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks for the work. Madam Secretary, could you please take us to item number 3 on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the third item is entitled Amendment of Part 74 of the Commission's Rules Regarding FM Translator Interference, and we will be presented by the Media Bureau. Michelle Carey, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief Carey, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Media Bureau presents a report and order that adopts rules to clarify and improve the Commission's FM translator interference complaint and resolution process. Joining me at the table are Albert Schulner, James Bradshaw, and Lisa Scanlon from the Media Bureau, and Lisa will present the item.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we are pleased to present this report and order regarding the Commission's processes for resolving claims of interference from FM translator stations. As an outgrowth of the Commission's successful AM revitalization efforts, we have seen dramatic growth in the number of FM translator stations. During the past 2 years alone, we have issued more than 1,700 cross-service FM translator construction permits to AM broadcasters. There now are over 8,000 authorized translator stations. The economic importance of FM translators to AM broadcasters in particular cannot be overstated. But with this success has come an uptick in interference complaints from primary FM stations due to the increasing number of translators on the air. Moreover, the interference resolution process can be lengthy, contentious, and expensive for all parties concerned. Therefore, there is a need for more certainty and clarity regarding how we expect stations to report and resolve issues with translator interference. Accordingly, the report and order adopts the following rules. First, the report and order allows FM translators to change to any available same band channel as a minor modification to mitigate interference, thus providing a quick and relatively inexpensive way to resolve interference and avoid lengthy conflicts. Second, the report and order establishes a minimum number of listener complaints proportionate to the population within the complaining station's protected contour, as well as other requirements for each claim of translator interference. Third, the report and order establishes the required contents of each listener complaint. Complaints that meet these requirements will be considered presumptively valid. These measures are intended to address the issue of translators facing potential suspension of operations based on scant evidentiary support. Fourth, the report and order seeks to reduce negative interactions between translator operators and listener complainants by making listener cooperation voluntary. If a listener chooses not to cooperate with the translator station, the translator and the complaining station must work together to achieve an objective, technical solution to the interference. Finally, the report and order establishes a signal strength contour of 45 dBu, beyond which listener complaints will not be actionable. This outer contour limit will preserve the complaining station's core listenership while increasing certainty for translator operators. The report and order also includes waiver criteria for licensees that believe interference is impacting a substantial listenership beyond this contour limit. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopts this report and order and requests editorial privileges to make any necessary technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon, for your presentation and work on the item. I will now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the number of FM translators has grown substantially following the tremendous efforts to revitalize AM radio stations under Chairman Pai's leadership, some concerns have been expressed over a potential increase in the number of interference complaints filed at the Commission as a result. This order strikes a thoughtful and careful balance in responding to the needs of the parties who are seeking to resolve complaints efficiently and effectively. Today, we also inject more certainty into the process by establishing reasonable time limits for resolving complaints and general complaint thresholds necessary to generate action. I would like to specifically thank the Chairman and the Bureau staff for working with me to tighten the remediation deadline process. By establishing a fixed contour for the timeline needed to resolve complaints, we add an even higher level of predictability to the process. While we expect many interference complaints will be resolved through relatively simple remedies, including the option to change channels by filing minor modifications, some will require a more extensive process. For those that are more complex, we preserve the Bureau's authority to extend the timeline at their discretion with an accompanying explanation documented in their correspondence with the parties. I've argued extensively for the need to create consistency in our processes, including acting in a timely manner, and the same should be held true for the private parties who are asked by the Commission with resolving interference complaints. This order achieves the goal of streamlining Commission processes and making them fair and reliable, and I will approve. I thank the Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. I'll have a statement for the record, but just wanted to say thank you for your work on this item. It's one that probably doesn't get a lot of headlines, but it's one that we've heard a lot about, and the reforms that we put in place are going to make a big difference to make sure stations can stay on the air and serve their communities. So thank you for your work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Reswurzel.
My colleague, Commissioner O'Reilly, just called this a very thoughtful approach, and I fully agree as we try to manage the increased demand for FM translators and the challenges with interference that arise as a result. So thank you to the Media Bureau. No statement.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The licensing, use of public airwaves, and mitigating interference between operators are responsibilities that this commission was founded upon. And after all, these airwaves are a scarce and valuable public resource that allows us to communicate with one another wherever we may be through broadcasting, radio communications, mobile wireless service, and more. And interference can cause grave problems for listeners and stations alike. When it comes to radio, we have our work cut out for us. Commercial radio broadcasting launched in the U.S. in 1920 with a handful of stations across the country, and today, nearly 100 years later, AM/FM radio reaches 93% of us every week, greater reach than any other communications technology. And each week, hundreds of millions of Americans tune in to their radio signals by more than 25,000 AM, FM, and low-power FM stations or translators. This impressive blanket of broadcasting allows communities across the country to access the news they need, information, entertainment, and receive critical emergency alerts in times of trouble. The success in our broadcasting system is due in no small measure to underappreciated advances in technology and vigilant licensing and engineering work by this commission. New technology or new policies can bring new opportunities, but also concomitant challenges. Here we grapple with how to handle interference concerns related to a recent influx of translators. And although translators receive only secondary protection, they are crucial parts of our radio landscape that allow signals to reach distant communities and navigate tricky terrain. This item considers the robust record and balances these interference concerns with the need for both FM stations and translators to continue to provide service to their listeners. While we must remain vigilant and ensure that these rules work as intended, I believe this item largely and definitely succeeds in finding such a balance, and I support it. Many thanks to the talented staff, of course, at the Media Bureau for your hard work.
Thank you, Commissioner. The concept of interference can cause significant controversy in the world of sports. For example, most Louisianans were outraged earlier this year when officials failed to call pass interference near the end of regulation of the NFC Championship game, likely denying the New Orleans Saints and all their Who Dat fans a spot in the Super Bowl. And last weekend, the Kentucky Derby set off a vigorous debate when the horse that crossed the finish line first was disqualified over alleged interference with other horses, in violation of what I now understand is a very extensive scheme in the Commonwealth of Kentucky of horse racing regulation. Now, these incidents demonstrate the importance of having clear rules for defining interference and the right procedure for resolving interference complaints. And what is true for sports is true for spectrum. And so today we simplify, along the lines that Ms. Scanlon outlined, the process for resolving complaints regarding interference caused by FM translators. I'll have a longer statement for the record along these lines, but I will simply want to thank the Media Bureau for the fantastic work on this item. As Commissioner Carr hinted, resolving FM interference may not be as glamorous or as fashionable as resolving interference in the NFL or the Kentucky Derby, but nonetheless, the staff in our Media Bureau handled this matter, I thought, with skill and aplomb. So thank you for the fantastic work. The item has my full support. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Approve.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted. The editorial privilege is granted as requested. Thanks for the great work. Madam Secretary, could you please take us to item number 4 on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 4 will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau and is entitled Auction of Toll-Free Numbers in the 833 Code, Comments Sought on Competitive Bidding Procedures, and Chris Monteith, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction. Oh, okay. Julia McHenry will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Ms. McHenry, welcome to the bench. This capacity, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Bureau of Economics and Analytics, along with the Wireline Competition Bureau, is pleased to present for your consideration a public notice seeking comment on procedures for the auction of over 17,000 toll-free numbers in the 833 code. This public notice, if adopted, would initiate the pre-bidding process for the auction. This process would serve as an experiment to using competitive bidding as a way to assign toll-free numbers equitably and efficiently. Seated at the table with me this morning are Gary Michaels, Deputy Chief of OEA Auctions Division, Scott McCool, Attorney Advisor in OEA Auctions Division, Chris Monteith, Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau, Heather Hendrickson, Assistant Division Chief of Competition Policy, and Matthew Collins, Attorney Advisor of the Competition Policy Division. In addition to those at the table, we'd like to thank those listed on the slide. Scott will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. With this public notice, we take a significant step toward the first ever auction of toll-free numbers in the United States. First, the public notice seeks comment on specific procedures to implement principles that the Commission set forth in the Toll-Free Assignment Modernization Order. The public notice proposes auction application requirements to ensure that a potential subscriber cannot engage multiple applicants to bid on its behalf, consistent with the Commission's decision to allow potential subscribers to participate directly in the auction or indirectly through responsible organizations or RESBORGs, but not both. Second, to deter anti-competitive behavior in the 833 auction, the public notice proposes to prohibit certain communications among auction applicants, similar to our prohibition that applies in Commission Spectrum and Universal Service auctions. The public notice also proposes to prohibit agreements related to toll-free numbers that are being auctioned, both among applicants and between applicant RESBORGs and non-applicant RESBORGs. Third, the public notice proposes specific auction application requirements consistent with the principle of promoting transparency and efficiency of the auction. Applicants would be required to provide the same level of ownership disclosure required in our Spectrum and Universal Service auctions, and to disclose the parties on behalf they are bidding. Fourth, the public notice proposes bidding procedures for the 8-3 auction. The auction will be conducted as a single-round, sealed bid, victory auction. The winning bidder for each number will be the bidder with the highest bid, and that bidder will pay the second highest bid amount for that number. The public notice also proposes an upfront payment of $100 per number to ensure that bidding is only by serious qualified bidders, and also proposes procedures to address scenarios where a toll-free number receives 2 or more tied bids or only 1 bid. Finally, the public notice also proposes a requirement for SOMOS, the designated toll-free numbering administrator, and the auctioneer to collect limited additional information on secondary market transactions to further the Commission's evaluation of the secondary market of toll-free numbers that are won at auction. The Office of Economics and Analytics and the Wireline Competition Bureau recommend adoption of this public notice and request editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll now turn to Commissioner O'Reilly for his comments.
Thank everyone for their work. No statement from me.
Okay, Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. We have more ways to communicate than ever before, from messaging apps to social media to email. But with all these new forms of communication, it's an innovation from the 1960s, toll-free calling, that continues to play a key role in our interactions. In fact, there are more than 40 million toll-free numbers in use today, which represents a 40% increase over the past decade. There's so much value in these numbers that we voted last year to experiment with this first ever auction of toll-free numbers and to allow those numbers to be transferred on the secondary market. This could be a much more equitable and efficient way of distributing numbers than the first-come, first-serve approach of the past. But as today's notice recognizes, there's still a lot we don't know. How many bidders will show up for this first auction? How much activity will we see in the secondary market? We don't have all the answers, so we're starting small with this experiment. We put rules in place to track the results. The information we gather can be used to help inform future auctions. So I want to thank the Office of Economics and Analytics, as well as the Wireline Competition Bureau, for your work on these auction procedures. The notice has my support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
With this public notice, the Federal Communications Commission takes another step in the direction of modernizing our toll-free number system. This is the right thing to do. For too long, distribution of toll-free numbers has meant a command and control system through a first-come, first-served approach. As part of this approach, the agency has prohibited a secondary market in toll-free numbers. But this method has limitations. And if you want to see them, just go ahead and do a simple search online. There is a vibrant marketplace out there where anyone can purchase a toll-free number from entities that openly flout our rules. So we are going to try another way. With the 833 toll-free area code, we are doing a test. We are going to experiment and do things differently. We're going to hold an auction. This is a sandbox effort, and it is good news. I fully support it. Now for the not-so-good news. When it comes to toll-free numbers, this agency has some housekeeping to do. Late last year, companies who deal in toll-free numbers came to the FCC pleading for guidance about the protections that pertain to geolocation call data, among the most sensitive consumer data. They ask for this agency to bless their use of third-party location aggregators so they can know with precision just when and where a wireless caller dials a toll-free number. This request is styled as an emergency petition. But I think the greater emergency is that this agency has been totally silent on everything involving third-party location aggregators and the black market that exists for the wireless surveillance of each and every one of us with a mobile device. Earlier this year, a reporter was able to identify that for a few $100s, a range of shady middlemen using these aggregators can tell you where any wireless phone is being used within a few hundred meters. This is unacceptable. This is an issue of personal and national security, and this agency, in the toll-free context and everywhere else, owes it to the American public to explain just what is going on when it comes to the privacy of our wireless devices.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
No statement from me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. In the second season of Seinfeld, Elaine is tired of waiting at one of the few tables at a popular Chinese restaurant to open up. She laments, and the aficionados out there might recall this, and I quote, "It's not fair that people are seated first come, first served. It should be based on who's hungriest." Well, Elaine's idea might not have taken off in the realm of Chinese cuisine, but here at the FCC, this is not a show about nothing. We have recognized that first come, first served may not be the best way to allocate scarce resources, such as toll-free numbers. And that's why we decided last year to experiment with allowing numbers in the recently opened 833 toll-free code to be assigned through an auction. The 833 auction will make available over 17,000 numbers for which there have been competing requests. It will let us see whether competitive bidding is an equitable and efficient way to distribute toll-free numbers, which should be useful as we assign toll-free numbers in the future. So today we take a critical step toward holding this first of its kind auction along the lines that were outlined by Mr. McCool in his presentation. And for the diligent work on this experiment, which we hope will bear fruit in the time to come. I, too, would like to thank the staff of the Office of Economics and Analytics, including Mr. McCool, for whom I believe this is the first presentation.
Yeah, actually, yes.
Bravo, well done. Wasn't memorized, but that's still pretty impressive nonetheless. So, the Office of General Counsel, the Wireline Competition Bureau, led by Chief Monteith, and the Office of Communications Business Opportunities. We will now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenbristle.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks, folks, for the great work. Madam Secretary, to item number 5 we go.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, your fifth item, entitled Thea Holdings A, Inc., requests for authority to launch and operate a non-geostationary satellite orbit system in the fixed satellite service, mobile satellite service, and Earth exploration satellite service. And it will be presented by International Bureau, and Tom Sullivan, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Sullivan, welcome back to the hot seat. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The International Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration this draft memorandum, opinion, order, and authorization addressing Thea Holdings Incorporated's request to provide services utilizing a constellation of non-geostationary satellites. In a little under 2 years, the Commission has considered and adopted 13 market access requests and applications to 9 companies proposing next-generation NGSO satellite systems. International Bureau staff continue to work on these complex applications and raise for your consideration one more grant today. I'm joined at the table by Troy Tanner, Deputy Chief of the International Bureau, Stephen Dool, Chief of the Satellite Policy Branch, Sean O'Moore, Attorney Advisor in the Satellite Policy Branch. I would like to acknowledge the contributions on this item from other staff in the International Bureau, as well as my colleagues in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Office of the General Counsel, and the Office of Engineering and Technology. Sean will present the item.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, good morning.
All right.
Before you for consideration is a draft memorandum opinion, order, and authorization that authorizes Thea Holdings A, Incorporated, to construct, launch, and operate a system of low Earth orbiting satellites to provide next-generation Earth imaging services. The draft order grants Thea's request to operate a constellation of 112 satellites with 8 on-orbit spares in 3 orbital planes. Thea's system will be able to capture continuous visible and broad infrared video of the entire Earth, near continuous high-resolution hyperspectral and active radar data, and microwave radiometer data, and provide this data to individuals and institutions around the world. Thea will use the 1215 to 1300 megahertz band for its Earth imaging operations and will operate gateway and user terminals in Ku, Ka, and V-band frequencies, that are part of the processing rounds to consider requests for a new generation of non-geostationary satellite orbit satellite systems. Data derived from TEA's constellation will be used to provide a range of services, including precision agriculture analytics, surveying and monitoring of infrastructure, real-time geophysical information, and first responder support to researchers, governments, businesses, and individuals around the world. The draft order considers the Commission's policies concerning orbital debris mitigation and spectrum efficiency. The order also specifies conditions to protect or accommodate other operations in these frequency bands. The International Bureau recommends adoption of this memorandum of opinion, order, and authorization, and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Would I be correct that this is your first presentation at a commission meeting?
No. My first was over 20 years ago.
Oh, is that really? Wow, okay. I would not be correct then, I think it's safe to say. Thank you for the presentation. Nonetheless, Commissioner O'Reilly, the floor is yours.
I thank the chair. No statement from me. I thank everyone for their hard work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. Our decision today is part of the FCC's broader push to enable a new generation of low Earth orbit satellites that could bring more competition and innovative services to Americans. Startups and established players alike have plans to launch thousands of these new satellites. And that's great news for consumers across the country. So I support today's decision to authorize, I'm going to get this name wrong, TEA, is how we're saying it?
TEA, yes.
TEA, thank you. TEA, to launch and operate 112 satellites that could be used for remote sensing, smart ag, imaging, and broadband applications. I concur, however, in the orbital debris portion of today's decision. In that section, the FCC conditions TEA's authorization on compliance with any new rules the Commission adopts in the orbital debris rulemaking we launched in November 2018. I voted to approve that rulemaking after my colleagues agreed to expand the inquiry by adding additional questions about the Commission's expertise and authority in this area. And there's no question that the possibility of thousands of new satellites passing each other in low Earth orbit at hypervelocity presents complex questions and will likely require a new set of rules that address collision risks. But as I said at the time, it's far from clear that the FCC is the right federal agency to make these assessments. My initial concerns have only grown as stakeholders recently filed comments in our rulemaking proceeding. For instance, those comments show that executive branch agencies, including NASA and the FAA, are taking action on orbital debris consistent with the President's decisions in the space policy directives. This includes work NASA's doing to revise the U.S. government orbital debris mitigation standard practices at the direction of the President. In my view, we should continue to look to these agencies with deep background and expertise on orbital debris for their leadership on appropriate mitigation measures. And while we've made no final decision in our rulemaking record, I remain concerned that the FCC is not the right federal agency to lead on orbital debris, and therefore I concur in that portion of today's decision. But I do want to express my sincere thanks to the International Bureau for all its work. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenbristle.
Get ready for what is headed to our skies. In the past year, the Federal Communications Commission has approved over 13,000 new satellites for launch. There's a lot of good that can come from all this new activity in the atmosphere. It means more capacity to connect more people in more places, expanded access to education and healthcare, and an ability to grow economies beyond the limits of today's terrestrial networks. Because this order and authorization is a small part of making all these big things possible, it has my support. Of course, increasing the number of satellites in orbit like this brings new challenges. Chief among them is the growing amount of debris in orbit that could make some regions of space unusable for decades to come. That should concern us, because junking up our far altitudes now will constrain our ability to innovate, connect, and advance satellite systems in the future. That's why last year I called for the FCC to do more than just rely on our old orbital debris rules for next-generation constellations. I called for us to initiate a comprehensive review to mitigate collision risks and ensure space sustainability going forward. And I called on the agency to coordinate more closely with other federal actors with distinct space interests and come up with clear national policies for this jumble of new satellite activity. But instead of doing this, the agency started a rulemaking late last year that took a passive approach. It asked if we have the expertise to work on the satellite issues involving orbital debris. This is news to a lot of people in this building, because of course we have been doing just that for more than a decade and a half, since 2004 when we first adopted our existing orbital debris framework. It also asked if we should cede our authority to other federal agencies that do not have statutory responsibility over commercial satellite systems. It worries me that this agency can question its own expertise to manage new space activity and simultaneously rubber stamp 13,000 new satellites for launch. Something in that equation does not compute. I believe our authority and responsibility to manage new commercial satellite systems and orbital debris risks is clear. We need to correct course, because it's not enough to approve new satellite systems like we do here. We need to move expeditiously to develop a realistic debris plan that can be implemented stat. The new space age is not waiting, and we have work to do.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
No comment from me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the IB for hard work.
Thank you, Commissioner. I, too, have no formal statement. I will mention two things, however. First, my sincere appreciation to the staff of the International Bureau for the great work on this item. Secondly, to express my sincere disappointment in Commissioner Carr for not being familiar with the Greek goddess Theia, who, as you should know, is one of the Titans, was the daughter of Gaia and Uranus, and the mother of Helios, the sun, of Selene, the moon, and Eos, which I believe was the dawn, if I'm not correct. But they learn us good in Kansas, is all I can say. So, no, thanks to the staff for the great work on this item. It, of course, has my full support. With that, we'll move to vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve in part, concur in part.
Just because of the Greek stuff? Right. Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Approve.
Commissioner Starks? Approve. And the chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks for the fantastic job. Madam Secretary, could you please take us to the last item on our agenda today?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, your sixth and final item, entitled Structure and Practices of the Video Relay Service Program, Telecommunications Relay Services and Speech-to-Speech Services for Individuals with Hearing and Speech Disabilities, will be presented by the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and Patrick Weber, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Weber, whenever you and your team are ready, the floor is yours. Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Today, the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau presents to you a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking on Video Relay Service, or VRS. This service enables people with hearing or speech disabilities who use sign language to make phone calls over broadband with a video phone. The item before you adopts measures and proposes others to improve this service and to protect the VRS program from waste, fraud, and abuse. I would like to thank the staff of CGB's Disability Rights Office for their hard work in this proceeding. I would also like to thank the Office of Economics and Analytics, the Office of General Counsel, the Office of the Managing Director, and the Enforcement Bureau for their contributions to this item. Joining me today at the table are Barbara Espin, CGB's Deputy Bureau Chief, Bob Aldridge, CGB's Front Office Legal Advisor, Elliot Greenwald, Deputy Chief of CGB's Disability Rights Office, and Michael Scott, Attorney Advisor in the office. Elliot will present the item.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I am pleased to present this report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking on VRS. VRS enables communication between users of American Sign Language, or ASL, and voice users. The VRS system also enables ASL users to communicate directly with other ASL users via point-to-point video calls. If adopted, the report and order enables direct video calling between VRS users and customer support call centers by permitting qualified entities to enter video-capable customer support telephone numbers in the TRS numbering directory. Taking such action will enhance the ability of ASL users to engage in more effective, efficient, and private communication with customer support call centers without the need for a communications assistant and without cost to the TRS fund. The report and order also improves the Commission's systems for preventing waste, fraud, and abuse in VRS. The item requires that call validation query data dips be directed to the appropriate system of records, either the TRS numbering directory or the user registration database as instructed by the Commission, the TRS fund administrator, or the TRS numbering administrator. This will allow effective and efficient operation of VRS data systems. In addition, the report and order requires VRS providers to submit registration information for public and enterprise video phones to the user registration database administrator. By completing the process of registering call phone numbers associated with VRS, this measure clears the way for the commencement of per-call validation queries. In addition, it assists the fund administrator in reviewing compensation requests involving such video phones and auditing their use, furthering the Commission's efforts to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse in the VRS program. The report and order also prohibits VRS providers from offering or providing non-service related products or other inducements to sign up for or use a VRS provider service, including inducements for a user to switch or not to switch to a different VRS provider. Finally, the report and order would adopt technical corrections to the TRS rules. To expand VRS providers' options for improving the quality and efficiency of VRS interpreting, the further notice proposes to convert the Commission's pilot VRS at-home call handling program to a permanent program. This pilot program has allowed VRS providers to have some VRS calls handled by communications assistants working at home, subject to safeguards designed to maintain service quality, protect call confidentiality, and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. The further notice also proposes to allow VRS providers to provide service to new and porting users for up to 2 weeks pending identity verification by the user registration database administrator, with compensation paid to the provider after verification is completed. In addition, the further notice seeks comment on a proposal to require login procedures for individuals using enterprise and public video phones for VRS calls. A login procedure at these video phones will help prevent the recurrence of waste, fraud, and abuse in the program by ensuring that the video phones are used only by callers actually registered for VRS. Finally, the further notice proposes a technical correction to the TRS rules. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwald, for your presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
I thank the chair. This item makes various improvements to the Commission's video relay service program and contains a number of good ideas. For example, I support the adoption of new rules to prohibit VRS providers from offering non-service related inducements to increase subscriptions. We must do everything we can to protect the investments of ratepayers and ensure that the telecommunications relay service fund remains sustainable. That requires eliminating wasteful practices that artificially drive up minutes and drain the fund without commensurate benefits for subscribers. While we're on the topic of sustainability, I also believe we need to think more broadly about how our TRS programs are addressing the actual needs of the deaf and hard of hearing community. As I explained in the Disability Advisory Committee last month, we need to face the reality that voice has become just another app and is declining in significance. Directing scarce resources to ensure access to a relic of the past does not necessarily accomplish the objective of providing functionally equivalent service. While a shift away from voice service may not be suitable for all TRS program participants, we must consider how free and low-cost app and technologies can better accommodate certain segments of the deaf and hard of hearing population. Given the substantial fund growth in recent years, this is necessary to ensure the program's sustained viability. I look forward to examining the record in response to the items for the notice and vote to approve. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Last week, I had a chance to meet Betsy. She's a speech pathologist whose organization helps children with disabilities communicate through the use of technology. She told me about a young girl named Mia. Mia is entirely nonverbal, meaning she can't say words or communicate with any sounds. Yet technology has given her a voice. Mia has a smartphone with an application that can speak for her with the push of a button. Thanks to this technology, Mia has been able to participate at school and tell her parents, "I love you," things that were not possible for her to do previously. Mia's story is a reminder that one of the most important roles technology plays is in bridging the communication divide for those with disability. And as technology advances, we're seeing more and more private sector innovations that help individuals with hearing, speech, or visual impairments communicate with the world around them. At the FCC, we need to support that trend. One way we do that is through the Commission's TRS fund, which subsidizes the cost of VRS, a service that allows people with hearing or speech disabilities to make phone calls over a broadband-enabled video phone. VRS helps ensure that Americans with hearing or speech impairments don't lose out on the connectivity essential to talking with friends and family, calling for help in an emergency, or accessing job opportunities. And given the significant role VRS plays in the hearing loss community, it's incumbent on us to ensure the program is available for those who need it. So I'm glad we're taking steps today to increase accountability in the program, but also to make it more accessible for everyone who benefits from it. So I want to thank the staff of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau for your work on the item. It has my support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, functional equivalency has been the foundation of our telecommunications relay service policies. Functional equivalency may sound like the kind of regulatory lingo that only a lawyer could love. But for millions of Americans with hearing and speech impairments, it means that they have the right and ability to pick up the phone, reach out and connect, and participate more fully in the world. Our video relay service program, which allows individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing to communicate using the phone system in a conversational way, plays a vital role in providing functional equivalency. But with the march of time comes changes in technology. So in order to keep our VRS policies current and honor the spirit and substance of functional equivalency, we need to make adjustments. This rulemaking seeks to do just that by making changes that will hopefully allow for greater access to VRS. It also asks questions to inform the agency's future work about in-home interpreting, and it asks about ways to speed service to new consumers or those that change providers. I support this order and rulemaking, and I appreciate, in particular, my colleagues' willingness to work with me to make the modifications I requested to ensure public and enterprise video phones are more accessible to persons with hearing and speech disabilities. Of course, this rulemaking is not the only work that lies ahead. We also have to address an outstanding petition that seeks clarity from this agency surrounding how telecommunications relay service fees are presented on consumer bills. As this agency considers this request, I hope that it carefully considers the duties and obligations that arise under the Americans with Disabilities Act, including the cherished principle of non-discrimination. On that score, it will be important to note the words of the National Council on Disability, which has warned that the requested relief is antithetical to the purpose of the ADA. I agree. Thank you to the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau and Disabilities Rights Office for your work on today's order and rulemaking and for your efforts to expand access to communications every day.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of all of our responsibilities here at the Commission, Section 225 of the Act truly stands out. Congress has tasked this agency with ensuring the provision of services so that persons who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind, or have speech disabilities can communicate in a manner that is functionally equivalent to persons without such disabilities. Our task is to make sure that all of the tools, conveniences, and opportunities that flow from that connectivity can be fully enjoyed by all of our friends and neighbors. Touching base with a doctor, getting help in an emergency, catching up with loved ones, and living independently is our job to make sure that those important moments are not missed due to inaccessible systems and services. Advances in technology do help. Video chat, translation, and interpretation services, and other relatively new tools have brought us closer to our goal of functional equivalence. But the Commission needs to keep its eye on the ball here to make sure that we're doing our part to allow these technological advances to truly benefit everyone. I support today's item. It advances direct video calling services, which better allow those with disabilities to have a natural one-on-one conversation with somebody without requiring the assistance of a third party, and it moves us a step closer to allowing communication assistants, the interpreters that fuel VRS services, to provide service from home without having to live close to a call center. Our pilot program on this point demonstrated that this was a win-win scenario, providing good jobs for more interpreters and allowing service providers to attract and retain high-quality professionals. All in all, this item advances our responsibilities under Section 225 and improves our VRS services for users. I support it and thank the Disability Rights Office and their colleagues in CGB for their hard work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. In 2010, Apple changed the world of modern wireless communications when it introduced FaceTime. But what has since become an enjoyable luxury for many of us, being able to see the person you're talking to on a screen, is a necessity for individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, or otherwise speech disabled. For them, being able to communicate via sign language across a digital platform is a critical link to the outside world. Well, today, the FCC is making that link stronger. Specifically, we're improving direct, unmediated, and private video communications between sign language users and customer support call centers, which are the recipients of a large amount of video relay service, or VRS, traffic. By broadening the range of direct video customer support entities that can access the TRS numbering directory beyond those defined as service providers, we will give those customer support call centers that choose to participate the chance to communicate more efficiently with customers who rely on American Sign Language. Qualified entities would access the TRS numbering directory according to the same rules and obligations that govern VRS providers. In this order, we are also taking some common sense steps to curtail the potential for waste, fraud, and abuse in the VRS program. For example, we are prohibiting VRS providers from offering non-service related inducements that are intended to entice consumers to sign up for or use a VRS provider's service. Non-service related giveaways don't improve service quality and may encourage unnecessary use of the service. But even with these steps taken today, our work in improving VRS is not fully done. And that's why we are proposing to make permanent the pilot program for at-home call handling, which allows VRS providers to handle some VRS calls from at-home workstations, subject to appropriate safeguards. The pilot program enabled providers to attract and retain qualified interpreters for whom working at the company's call centers is not a practical option, which in turn expanded the available pool of qualified sign language interpreters who can improve VRS reliability. Now, of course, all that we are seeking to accomplish in this item and elsewhere would not be possible with the fantastic work of a great many people within the Commission. And so I want to thank the Office of the Managing Director, the Office of General Counsel, the Office of Economics and Analytics, the Office of Communications Business Opportunities, but most importantly, the fantastic staff of the Disability Rights Office within the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau for the terrific work on this item and so many other items that extend the promise of technology to those Americans with disabilities. You have my sincere appreciation. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Riley?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Approve.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks again for the great work. Do any of my colleagues have any announcements today?
I do.
Commissioner Starks?
Yes, we are here today to celebrate Daudeline Mamay. Go ahead, stand up, Daudeline. Please. Everybody. It was just 2 meetings ago that I was thanking Daudeline for her help, her immense help for me as my first acting chief of staff. And I am both with bittersweet joy. Here we are celebrating that that Daudeline is leaving the FCC. She was indispensable to me in transitioning, like I said, serving as my first chief of staff, getting me settled on the 8th floor. Daudeline, I will miss your wise counsel. You are a formidable advocate. And of course, thank you, as everyone knows, for your positive attitude. Please do stay in touch. We're going to all miss you. And I know I speak not out of turn for former Commissioner Clyburn, where she thanks you, of course, from the bottom of her heart as well. And we'll miss you.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
I just also want to say thank you to Daudeline, who my office had the privilege of working with when she served in Commissioner Clyburn's office. I also want to thank Nathan for hooking me up. I am proud to be a founding member of the Bipartisan Coffee Caucus.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thanks also to Nathan for not offering to buy me coffee.
I got some from him.
Yeah, I'm quite aware, yes. I also have a few announcements. First and foremost, I want to join in my colleagues' recognition of and appreciation for the work that Daudeline put in here at the Commission. Daudeline, you're a friend to many on the dais, plenty throughout the Commission, and even without the Commission. We will miss you, but are very grateful for your time in public service. I also want to recognize Rachel Bender, a former wireless advisor in my office, wireless international and engineering advisor, rather. I don't even know where to start with Rachel. I mean, she has been the tip of the spear on some of the most important things this agency has done. Just to pick 2 examples, she was instrumental in formulating and then helping to execute on the 5G Fast Plan, a concrete blueprint for facilitating America's superiority in 5G technology. She also went to the Plenipotentiary Conference last fall, where for the first time in the 150-year history of the International Telecommunications Union, the elected officials included now a woman, an American woman, who is going to represent the interests of many constituencies around the world. She's handled some of the most complex issues that we have confronted here at the Commission, a lot of which you will never see. Phone calls, emails, meetings, and the like with federal partners and plenty of other stakeholders to try to get more spectrum freed up for commercial use. She knows how difficult some of those labors have been. But on a personal note, I will say, having spent time with Rachel on the back roads of rural America as well as the international stage, she is one of the smartest, one of the hardest working, one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. And despite the fact that I love saying that once she told me she was leaving her office, she would be dead to us, nonetheless, she's very much alive and kicking. And I want to say, Rachel, you're not just a great coworker, you've been a fantastic friend. We wish you all the best, and to Joshua and the rest of your family in the time to come. Stay in touch, and best wishes going forward. Thank you. And into Rachel's big shoes steps Mr. Aaron Goldberger. Aaron is not a stranger to most in this agency. He joins the chairman's office from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, where most recently he served as Associate Bureau Chief and Deputy Director of the Rural Broadband Auction Task Force. Before rejoining the commission in November of 2018, he served as Vice President at Newstar. And before joining Newstar, I actually met him many years ago when I was in the Office of General Counsel, and he was working for one of my predecessors, Chairman Kevin Martin, as senior, as legal advisor. He also served as senior legal advisor to former Commissioner Tate and counsel in the office of Chairman Powell. He's also served as acting deputy director of the FCC's Office of Legislative Affairs, senior legal advisor to the bureau chief in WTB, senior advisor in the Wireline Competition Bureau, and probably a few other positions that I've forgotten. Unfortunately, for those of you who are Wolverine fans, he got his bachelor's with honors from Michigan State and his law degree from Indiana, where he served as senior managing director, editor rather, of the Federal Communications Law Journal. Aaron, you've got a big job to do, but you've already discharged those responsibilities with aplomb. So thank you for that work. Last but not least, I don't know if he's here today, but Will Holloway, is he here? Ah, Will, excellent. Will recently left our office. He served as an intern for the past several months. He was just fantastic. He's graduating later this month from Catholic Law School, and he's going to be studying for the bar. He's going to be returning, luckily, later this year as an honors attorney here at the FCC, so that influx of the best and brightest talent continues. He did great work in our office. I'm informed that he wrote more statements, draft statements for meeting items than any other intern who's worked in our office over the past 7 years, which is no small feat. Most notably, however, it was observed that one time when he was answering some of the phones in our office, he got a call from somebody who was asking repeatedly and persistently about the mug, the infamous mug, specifically where he could get one. And my understanding is Will said something along the lines of, I would just go on eBay and try to find it. And that was probably the best answer you could give. I really want to appreciate the work you did, Will, in our office. You're a great addition to the team. We'll miss you, but I know you're going to be coming back soon enough. Best wishes this summer. Good luck on the bar, and we'll be in touch. Commissioner O'Reilly? Okay, that's, unless anyone else. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Carr.
I wanted to chime in as well on those leaving the commission. Dudley, thank you for your service. You've done tremendous work on the 8th floor for a number of different commissioners, always working to find common ground on what are sometimes some contentious issues. And so I appreciate the work that you've done here and wish you best of luck in your next adventure. And Rachel as well, thank you for your service to the agency. As the chairman said, you've done just phenomenal work helping to secure our leadership in wireless, whether it's 5G or other next generation connectivity. From a distance, I can see that you've knocked it out of the park over there, so congratulations and best of luck as well.
Hear, hear. With that, Madam Secretary, could you please announce the date of the next commission open meeting?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, June 6, 2019.
And so we are adjourned.
All right. Hello, everyone. If everyone could please be seated or take your conversations outside. Thank you very much. We're now going to get started with the chairman's open meeting press conference, and seeing as everybody is seated and ready to go, I'll hand things over to Chairman Pai. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Tina. And good afternoon, everybody. When we rolled out our May agenda, I identified network security as the primary theme of this month's meeting. In that spirit, the FCC just voted to deny China Mobile's application to offer telecommunications services in the United States. Our decision today is consistent with a recommendation we received from executive branch agencies, which conducted an exhaustive review and found that granting China Mobile's application would pose an unacceptable risk to our national security. This is the latest in a series of steps this month alone, reflecting an interagency effort to promote secure communications networks. Last week, I was proud to be part of a U.S. delegation that traveled to Prague for an important conference on how best to secure 5G networks. I'm grateful to the leaders of the Czech government, including the Prime Minister, for convening that conference, which featured government officials from more than 30 countries, as well as industry leaders. I'm even more gratified that this gathering was able to develop a set of consensus best practices for 5G security. Dubbed the Prague Proposals, these guiding principles fall into 4 categories: policy, technology, economy, and security, and they are available on a website hosted by the Czech government. I would highlight that the conference chairman's summary report memorializing these recommendations specifically highlights supply chain security as a concern. It observes, and I quote, "Major security risks emanate from the cross-border complexities of an increasingly global supply chain. These risks should be considered as part of the risk assessment based on relevant information and should seek to prevent proliferation of compromised devices and the use of malicious code and functions." Moreover, one of the specific principles agreed to at the conference was that, and I quote, "Security and risk assessments of vendors and network technologies should take into account rule of law, security environment, vendor malfeasance, and compliance with open, interoperable, secure standards, and industry practices to promote a vibrant and robust cybersecurity supply of products and services to deal with the rising challenges." Now, overall, the Prague proposals are a valuable roadmap for deploying secure and reliable 5G networks. They reflect well Prime Minister Babish's admonition at the start of the conference that 5G security must be a priority, and that the proposals gained such wide support was due in part to the close collaboration among U.S. government agencies, including the FCC, and direct engagement on the international stage. I look forward to working with my colleagues on the Commission, our federal partners, elected officials, and our foreign counterparts to help put these principles into practice. And the Prague 5G Security Conference was not my only work on this subject of late. I also spoke to a Department of Defense Spectrum Conference, briefed the Senate Select Intelligence Committee on Intelligence, and, as you just saw, helped to deliver a unanimous FCC vote to prevent China Mobile from entering the U.S. market. Not a bad 2 weeks. With that, I would like to open up the floor to questions that you might have.
Margaret, you're first up today. Great. Margaret McGill with Politico. I want to ask about the departure of NTIA Administrator David Rettel. How is that going to affect issues in front of the FCC, like the upcoming work conference, and then also the supply chain security proposal? I understand that the FCC was kind of waiting for guidance from the executive branch on that before moving forward.
With respect to the first point, I just learned the news, so I haven't had a chance to think about how it will affect things going forward. I'll simply say that I appreciate the work of my former colleague within the administration and wish him all the best as a friend going forward.
And on this, can you address the supply chain issue and kind of is it guidance from the executive branch that's holding that up, or are there other issues?
Yeah, we have been waiting for the Commerce Department to express the administration's views with respect to defining the list of companies or entities that would be prohibited from supplying equipment or services within our supply chain proceeding.
Yeah, Monty Taylor, Com Daily. You just had to issue an order that redid the way you guys handled FM translator interference. Does the need to do that mean that you authorize too many translators? Is it too crowded out there?
No, I think to the contrary, what you just saw was, as Commissioner O'Reilly aptly pointed out, a very thoughtful approach to resolving the issue. We can have the best of both worlds. We can encourage the continued service, the important service of thriving FM stations, and we can make sure that those translators that have gotten on the air are able to provide the valuable service that those broadcasters are now finally able to provide through our AM radio revitalization initiative. And so, in our view, modifying the process as we did was a way of reducing the number of meritless complaints that we get, and also making sure that we can more quickly deal with the ones that we do get. And so, to me at least, that was a win for both the translator community as well as the incumbent FM stations.
John Reed, Bloomberg Law. As you know, there's been a lot of concern from Capitol Hill on reforming the 477 process.
Yeah.
How far along are you in that process, and could there be action within the next couple of months, years away? It's been a while since I think there's been an update on this.
Certainly closer to months than years.
Okay.
We've been working very actively with the staff that's handling this issue, as well as outside stakeholders who have been making different proposals along these lines. And ultimately, the goal, as I stated when we initiated the Form 477 proceeding, was to take a look at this process that we inherited that has not given us as granular or as accurate a set of data that we need in order, and hopefully we'll be able to resolve that in a way that gives us the information that we need to make better, more accurate decisions about broadband funding distribution.
Hi, Chairman. Kelsey Griffiths with Law 360. I was wondering if you could talk about some of these other Chinese telecommunications carriers that already have this authorization to interconnect with U.S. networks. Do you think that these authorizations should be looked at again, and why do you think China Mobile flagged these concerns and these other authorizations did not?
You saw the rationale that we adopted with respect to that particular pending application. What I can say is now that vote having been cast, we've already been looking at some of the other authorizations that have been granted.
Hi, Casey Egan, S&P Global. You mentioned the supply chain proceeding is still outstanding. Can the rejection of China Mobile's application be seen as an indicator of how you're thinking about international suppliers believed to pose a national security risk?
I think my statements on this have been very clear that we want to make sure that our communications supply chain is secure. And that involves making sure that with respect to the universal service funding that we expend, it's not being devoted on equipment or services that come from companies that might present a national security threat. And regardless of where those companies might be located, regardless of what countries they might be located in, we want to have a consistent framework that makes sure that wherever the supply, these products or services are coming from, that our networks are as secure as possible, that we mitigate the risk to the extent we can.
Hi, my name's Toby, I'm from Policy Tracker. On 1675 to 1680 megahertz, do you have any plans to look at the other parts of Lagarde's proposal for making use of 40 megahertz of spectrum? I understand that they want authorization to use that for terrestrial services. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. We have not yet made any determinations about other bands that might be related to the 1675 band.
Okay. So you just spoke, Howard Busker, Communications Daily, you just spoke to a DoD conference the other week. And from what I understand, one of the DoD's big focuses is bidirectional sharing, and that's been stalled for a long time. I know that you've sought comment, but do you have any sense of whether that's something that it looks like could be done in some areas, at least in a limited way?
I don't have any forecast on either where we might go with respect to bidirectional sharing or when we might make any pronouncements. We're continuing to work internally and with some of our federal partners, most notably, of course, the Department of Defense, on the way forward. I will say, having mentioned the Department of Defense, I do appreciate the collaborative spirit with which they engaged us with respect to the 37 gigahertz band and the ability to work with them collaboratively to reach an accommodation that enabled us to push forward with the December 10th auction of the 37, 39, 47 gigahertz band, while also addressing some of the interests they had with respect to military installations that could be carved out from those commercial deployments was, I think, a framework that bodes very well for the FCC vis-a-vis other federal partners.
Matt Danneman, Communications Daily. Both Commissioner Rosenworcel and Commissioner Carr were very vocal up on the dais about orbital debris authority kinds of issues from a very diametrically opposed kind of standpoint, it seems. I guess I'm curious, do you personally think that the FCC should be setting regulation and policy in this area? Should it be codifying something created by other agencies? Where do you see the FCC's authority and role playing in orbital debris? And also its role in going forward with an orbital debris proceeding when other agencies like Commerce are talking about doing said thing as well?
I certainly appreciate the importance of the question. The record in that particular proceeding recently closed, and so we are reviewing that record and will patiently study the facts, apply the laws best we can, and reach a determination that we think is in the public interest. But I can't forecast at this point exactly where we're going to end up.
Right, but I guess I'm just wondering your personal opinion as opposed to say what the record might determine.
My opinion is going to be informed by the facts in the record, and I haven't had a chance to study those facts in sufficient detail to this point.
Marian Bax from Inside Cybersecurity. So there are concerns, including from folks in industry, that using a country of origin system for determining what entities present a national security threat is not optimal. What are the FCC's ideas for determining what entities constitute a national security threat, a la the Universal Service Fund proposal, for example, beyond, instructions or opinions of other parts of government, such as DHS, which
in contrast, importantly, I think, to the FCC, does not have a public comment process. And there are some from the dais who say someone from the dais should be present at DHS. Do you support that call as well? 2 questions.
With respect to the second, we're already a member of the working group, and
But in terms of someone from this dais, or someone more high level, being involved in the executive committee, which FCC is not represented on.
we have full input into the working group we're participating. Just yesterday, I sat literally next to the head of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS, Chris Krebs. You can certainly ask him what kind of cooperation he's gotten from the FCC, and I have a pretty good feeling that he will give you an answer that suggests that there is indeed close collaboration between our 2 agencies. With respect to the first piece of it, that's why we are awaiting the Department of Commerce's definition of the entities, list of entities that might present a national security threat to the United States, such that the equipment or services should not be deployed within U.S. networks. And I would have to refer you to the Department of Commerce for analysis of that first part of that question.
Hi, Chairman. Ryan Tracy with the Wall Street Journal. I'd like to ask you about where you are in auto dialers, but can I first ask you for a clarification of an earlier answer? You said that the FCC is looking at some of the existing Section 214 authorizations.
Mm-hmm.
I think the context for that question was about the two Chinese firms, China Unicom and China Telecom. Are those the firms that you're specifically looking at?
What I can say is we are looking at those authorizations, yes.
Of those 2 companies, or just are you making a broader statement not naming those 2 companies?
We are looking at those 2 companies.
Thank you. And the definition of auto dialers, I understand, is something y'all are working on. Can you give us an update on timing?
No update on timing. We're continuing to work with the staff on the various issues involved under the TCB, including that particular issue.
Dave Shepardson from Reuters. Just to follow up on the last couple questions. So in terms of the Commerce Department, what's preventing you from moving forward with the rule saying, these are a threat to the supply chain, and then once the Commerce Department gives you the list, then you can implement it?
Well, as outlined in the notice of proposed rulemaking, we want to make sure that we are creating some certainty for the industry in terms of what the universe of entities is that our domestic carriers will or will not be allowed to use universal service funding to procure equipment and services from. And so while in concept, I can see the appeal of your question, nonetheless, I mean, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we have a coherent framework, a finalized framework that the industry can move forward on.
And then in terms of the 2 Chinese carriers that have the same 214 authorization that China Mobile was seeking, do you have to go through a formal process of revoking that, notice and comment, NPRM? And are you concerned that if you did proceed, that China would retaliate against U.S. carriers?
I would defer to the International Bureau and the Office of General Counsel with respect to the legal technicalities with respect to those authorizations. With respect to the second question, though, I stand firmly in support of the notice of proposed rulemaking that we advanced last year, along with the statements that other administration officials, most notably Secretary Pompeo, has made with respect to this issue. The security of our next generation networks cannot be an afterthought. It has to be a top-level priority now. And that's part of the reason why I've been collaborating with our federal partners domestically and on the international stage to make sure that we put everybody on notice that the security of these networks is going to be a major consideration for the administration at the front end.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Chairman. You say you're looking at China Telecom and China Unicom. What does looking at mean? Can you describe the process that's been going on here? Thank you.
Unfortunately, I can't provide you more details at this time. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. At this point, we'll proceed to the Bureau press conference led by my colleague, Mark.
Why don't we take both international items at the same time, China Mobile and Thea. If international is here, why don't you come up? Okay. Are there questions on those items, first of all? Yes, okay. Hi, Tom.
Matt Danneman, Communications Daily. On THEA, I guess I'm wondering, can the Bureau discuss or can it elaborate on what the timing might be or the progress is on other NGSO processing round and V-band processing round applications now that you've got this one off your deck? With how much more time to clear the rest, do you think? Well, I know I have staff working very hard and diligently on all of the remaining applications. I can't give you a sense of timing because as we work through them, if we discover a technical issue that needs resolution and we have to interface with the executive branch agencies, for example, through the NTIA coordination IRAC process, it may delay things. So I can't give you a clear sense until we're right about ready to release it, and then it goes on the pre-release circulation. But do know that we are working diligently through all of these, trying to meet all of the applicants' needs and desires to get out there.
Does the Bureau have a hope-for time frame, an aspirational time frame?
We have our own internal guidelines that I work with the division and staff on, and other bureaus and offices that need to be a part of this process. But again, I can't share that with you. I'm sorry.
Thanks.
Yes.
Any others on these two? Thank you, Ivy. Great. The next item is wireless 1675 to 1680 band. Are there questions on that item? Howard, okay. Wireless.
Yeah, Howard Rusker, Communications Daily. I don't think this was covered in too much detail during the presentation, but were there changes in the NPR to reflect some of the requests of, it was, Legato in particular had wanted changes, like on license sizes, for example, and at least ask about a national license.
The way I would describe it is there were no significant substantive changes. The draft was revised to reflect ex partes that had been submitted, and there was a tweak to reflect a change in the definition of a small business entity.
Of small business, okay. Right,
That's
that's the key question, so thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Any others on this? Okay, thank you. The next is the FM translator item. Monty, okay, Media Bureau, please.
Thanks, guys. Monty Taylor, Com Daily. I just had some questions about stuff that is probably in the final, but I haven't been able to see it yet. When you guys voted on the order, they never said what the minimum number of complaints now is or what the complaint range is. Can you tell me what it is in the final?
A cap of 25.
Cap of 25. And a bunch of commenters had asked that the population being counted be changed to where the interference is rather than where the full power station is. Did that change or did that stay the same?
I think you'll see that in the item.
We don't need suspense for this. Okay, and were there any other significant changes? Commissioner O'Reilly mentioned that the timeline has changed. Can you tell me specifically how that requirement changed?
The timeline didn't change, but we added some clarity to the 90-day remediation process, and as Commissioner O'Reilly indicated, we added a clause that to the extent that it goes beyond the 90 days, either shorter or longer, the Bureau must provide an explanation for that change.
Okay. You don't want to change your mind and answer that question about the population thing. Okay. I guess that's all I got then.
Okay, thanks.
Any others on this item? Okay, thank you, Media Bureau. The toll-free number item is next. Matt, so wireline and OEA, please.
I just need wireline. OEA doesn't need to come up if it doesn't want to.
You never know.
It's not your call.
Great.
Matt Daneman, Communications Daily. I guess sort of two blocks of questions, but one of them's the same. First off, from the draft, were there any substantial changes to the PN from the draft as to what was voted on today?
No.
Okay. And then the other question, it's sort of two-part, but it's the same question. Have there been any Bureau discussions regarding subsequent auctions, particular dialing codes? The idea of subsequent auctions came up during this meeting. And have there been any Bureau discussions about secondary markets beyond 833 and what that, is that being investigated or talked about at all within the Bureau?
I think, as we said in the item, we are viewing this as an experiment with respect to the 833 code, both how the auction itself proceeds and then with respect to secondary markets. So we'll look very closely at how it goes and make decisions about future auctions, how we might roll out secondary markets in other instances based on what we see.
Right. Thank you very much.
Any others on this item? Thank you. Finally, the VRS item with CGB. Are there questions about that item? Okay, thank you very much. And the commissioners are here for their portion of the press conference.
Running solo today, Commissioner Carr had some other obligations, so take any questions you may have for me. We'll start at this end and we'll go that way.
Monty Taylor, Com Daily. I've been hearing that people are expecting KidVid this summer. Can you confirm that or narrow that down or what?
I've been hearing, that's good. The timing of items are decided by the chairman. I think we're continuing to have conversations. I am certainly having conversations with interested parties, trying to find commonality and see where we can go. I don't have a timeline. This
So
summer
he
sounds.
hasn't indicated any timeline to you or anything?
He's still working through his schedule, I'm sure, and will tell me at the appropriate time. I hope to be concluding in the very near future, but I don't have one for you.
Thank you.
John Reed, Bloomberg Law. What changes do you want the FCC to make to the Form 477 process? You know, there's been a lot of industry proposals floated. Have you had a chance to look at those? And what are
I've
your
just been
thoughts?
able to scratch the surface on some of those, so I don't have a firm landing spot on what exactly it should look like. I've expressed this. I think all my colleagues have the problems with our current structure. I've also said that it wasn't designed for this purpose that we're asking it to do, so the fact that we need to change it should not be too surprising for anybody. And trying to find that right place going forward will require an awful lot of work, and we want to make sure we get it right.
Hi, Commissioner Kelsey Grivis with Law 360. I was wondering if you could comment on David Reddle's resignation today and potentially give a little background on the nature of your collaboration with him in the past, if any.
Well, I'll have a statement at some point today, as I don't want to preempt myself. But I thank David for his work. I just learned of it as you all have, or at least I was on the dais when I learned of it. So I haven't talked to him to know exactly what all went into his decision making. But I appreciate his willingness to serve this administration. And then we go back a number of years. We worked on the 2012 Spectrum Act, and so I've known him for quite a while, and have worked with him on a number of different things. We've agreed on some, disagreed on others. He's a very passionate individual. And a very knowledgeable individual. I'm sure he'll do incredibly well, whatever his future brings him.
Thank you.
Hi, Commissioner. Casey Egan, S&P Global. In light of the item today on Thea and the recent decision on SpaceX, I'm just wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about how you're thinking about satellite constellations realistically being a solution for high-speed internet service.
Well, I think we have before, I can't remember exactly which number this is in terms of the applications that we've approved. We've had, a dozen or so, or a little bit more than that. I venture to guess that not all of them will succeed in the marketplace. We'll have to determine, see what happens as we move our approval. They're also conditioned on a number of other things that that we have to do some bigger ticket items, inline interference and the optical, the orbital debris issue and a bunch of other things that kind of go into them. So they're not the final piece of the puzzle. But in terms of, we're going to see some launches hopefully really soon, and we'll see what the product is. I've been supportive of satellite being an alternative if it can meet these thresholds that the Commission sets. And if they can, then I think that's incredibly beneficial in what the areas it can cover. It can certainly reduce the amount of support needed in many areas. And you think of what happened in CAF Phase 2, a number of satellite providers, one satellite provider had quite substantial success in the auction, and hopefully those consumers will be served. If not, they should expect that the Commission will be fully on the enforcement side to make sure that they live up to their commitments.
Hi, this is Toby from Policy Tracker. I'm wondering on 1675 to 1680 megahertz item, should the FCC look at the other parts of Legardo's request, like being able to use different bits of spectrum for terrestrial services?
Well, I think that that's a pending and ongoing issue, and there are a lot of different views on that, that subject matter, and the chairman will figure out the timing on, if or when to move forward on that. This is one piece that was ripe, and we'll just see if the other is ready anytime soon.
Okay, I had two questions. One on David Rettel. Do you foresee any complications in terms of the WRC or anything? I mean, because it's generally considered not good to have, big leadership changes, and we're not that far away from the conference.
I'll answer two. Let me do this one, and we'll go to your second one, okay? No, I don't see this being problematically. I've only had a couple minutes to digest it. We have a very capable individual as the delegation head in Grace Coe, and so I'm very comfortable with her leadership, and I think she'll be is doing a great job and trying to pull all the U.S. views together and represent the United States and the delegation. David would have been an added asset to that, but whoever is picked for that slot will be, I'm sure, be able to fulfill the needs once confirmed. If there may be an acting, I don't know. That's something for someone else to decide. But I think that the delegation does not suffer from any particular loss or any except if Grace were to leave tomorrow, I think that would be hard to replace immediately. But I think she's more than capable of leading the team forward as we get ready for WRC 19.
And then also I wanted to ask you about mid-band and sort of the scorecard. Are you seeing any progress in any particular? What bands do you think we're seeing the most progress on right now? Maybe since the last time the last press conference a month ago.
Sure. Well, look, I was just in Charlotte talking to the CBRS Alliance and their desire to move forward on both the GAA and the licensed portion. I think we're getting closer to, hopefully being able to structure the auction next year at some point, and then being able to, finalize a timing, and I look forward to that. I think that's probably going to be one of the earlier mid-band auctions that go forward, and then other bands. I think I'm cautiously optimistic on what I've been hearing regarding the C-band and different conversations that are occurring, both internal and external, and conversations that I've had. I found that the process to a little bit more momentum than maybe it had in the past. I think that's a good thing, and parties are starting to try and work things out rather than get their backs up. And so I think that's generally productive, and I'm hopeful that will lead to a conclusion in the very near future, to get us to the point where we then could, auction, depending on how the issues are designed. As I said before, I think the decision to reallocate the C-band is pretty much concluded. I think almost everyone agrees that we're going to reallocate a portion of that. Then it becomes a question of how much, when, and what's the mechanism. And I think those conversations are continuing to ongo.
Okay, thank you.
Sort of two questions, but related. I guess I'm curious your personal thoughts on the agency's authority on orbital debris. Obviously, it was an issue that came up with a couple of the other commissioners. And as a caveat or as a subset to that, I'm wondering how you think the agency should go about with its orbital debris proceeding, given concerns that were expressed last month by Commerce and others about pausing this while their agencies catch up.
The second question I think I answered last meeting, so I'll defer to that reference. But on the first one, I would say I think the FCC has a role in that process. I've never viewed it as a solo role, one that we would go on by ourselves, but I also think it's important that we be engaged in that structure, given our role in terms of licensing the satellite constellations that are going to have fleets that are much larger than ever before. So I think it's probably right between the viewpoints of my colleagues on this subject matter. I always viewed that we were going to be working with other agencies in the process, but I also would like to see them move forward as quickly as possible. I don't think it's something we should wait on. It's one of the pieces. If you look back, things I've talked about, satellite policy has been of interest to me, and something that I've worked on. So I find it something that we can find commonality on. It's not. It's more of a technical issue, despite some disagreements on jurisdiction.
Thank you.
All right. Any questions down there? Yes. No.
Not today.
Okay. Good. Good. Anyone else for some questions?
Oh,
sure.
So do you
share Commissioner Carr's view that the FCC should reconsider those authorizations for the other two Chinese telecoms on 214?
Well, I don't want to get too specific. I was aware that process was, and I didn't know at the time I was able to comment, so I didn't. I would just say that, in any situation that we find ourselves with the circumstances along the lines of China Mobile or others, we should certainly have an opportunity to review and reconsider past decisions that were made, and maybe the circumstances have changed or the structure has changed. So I think that's appropriate in our approach, but I don't want to get any more specific than that, given what I know.
Do you think that the examinations should go beyond just? I mean, is this just a China thing, or would you like to see it? I mean, are there other providers that should be
I think I
part
just
of
said that I stand by, that fit the pattern. It's not about one particular country. If there are other countries or other situations that fit the problematic situation and raise national security issues, and viewpoints from our team telecom expertise and their commenting, I think that's duly appropriate. All right, John, no, not again. Okay, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
How can we finish off the afternoon?
Yeah, John Reader, Bloomberg Law. How do you guys think the FCC should revamp the Form 477 process? There's been a lot of proposals out there. Are there any that you guys like in particular? Should pricing be in there? I'd like to get your thoughts.
First things first, we need to know with precision where broadband is and is not in this country if we want to fix the digital divide. After all, you cannot manage problems that you do not measure. And right now, our Form 477 process is woefully deficient. It assumes that if there is a single broadband subscriber in a census block, that service is available throughout. That has resulted in an undercounting by millions of households that do not have access to internet today. This agency has got to head back to the starting line and find a new way to proceed. I've put a lot of ideas out there over time, including local crowdsourcing, using our offices around this country to do some spot checks, also using our resources at the Universal Service Administrative Company, and we are in a position right now where we have to take any and all ideas to fix this problem. We are not going to be able to address the digital divide without taking seriously the deficiencies in our Form 477 process.
And I would echo that. The fact that we don't have a good grasp on who has broadband and where is at the very crux of the problems that we're having. And we've seen it manifest itself again with Mobility Fund 2 having to be mothballed. We've seen it now, what I believe, in the Broadband 706 report. Some of the foot stomp, Commissioner Rosenworcel, I think the census block is something that has got to be changed, getting it more granular. But really the real talking point here is that any of these proposals are going to be better than what we have right now.
Hi, Commissioners. Kelsey Griffiths with Law 360. I was wondering if you would be able to comment on David Reddle's resignation. I know this obviously just came out a few minutes ago, but can you even talk about the extent of your coordination with him or sort of the legacy you think he left at Commerce?
I appreciate that. This was news to me as I sat here on the dais. I've known David Reddle for years. He is a great public servant, and I have always thoroughly enjoyed working with him. I think his knowledge of spectrum issues is second to none, and I regret that he has stepped down from his post.
I obviously saw it as well in real time, and whenever you lose a public servant, these jobs they come with a lot, but public service is a mission to serve something larger than yourself, and so don't fully understand, of course, the reasons that he is stepping down, but sad to see another public servant leave, and he is charged there at NTIA with spectrum management in a way that is singularly focused, and I'm sad to see him leave that post.
As a follow-up, I was just wondering, I'm not sure if you're able to go here, but there has been some friction between the FCC and NTIA on some of the federal spectrum sharing issues. Do you think that that factored into the decision at all, or are you aware of anything that might have been going on there?
I have no knowledge that would allow me to speak to that question.
Hi, Casey Egan, S&P Global. I was just curious if either of you have a reaction to Commissioner Carr's calls for the national security agencies to examine whether the FCC should revoke existing Section 214 authorizations for those other two Chinese companies.
I have no firsthand knowledge with respect to this, but based on the conversation that has taken place here today, I understand that that is actually already underway between perhaps this agency, national security authorities, and the State Department.
Exactly right. And you know, what you saw here was a unanimous panel here, in some ways, in a certain holding, singing from the same hymn sheet, that wherever you see other international 214s in particular that have this same security issue, that it should be addressed.
Hi, this is Toby from Policy Tracker. On 1675 to 1680 megahertz, I was wondering if you could comment on whether or not the FCC should look at the other ideas that came from Legato about using their spectrum for terrestrial services, and if it's time for the FCC to grapple with the wider issues on this one.
Well, we've got two different things we're going to need to coordinate with NTIA on. The first is, according to the Spectrum Act, they're going to have to produce a study specifically on the viability of sharing in the 1675 to 1680 megahertz band. In addition, with respect to the other spectrum, we're going to need to coordinate with NTIA to make sure that we are in alignment. All of these activities are going to take some time, but we're going to have to make sure we get them right so that we do not affect essential weather balloon services.
Yeah, I had two questions. One was, I just wanted to clarify. So it sounded like the Republicans all knew that this broader investigation was underway, but you guys hadn't been told about that before the meeting of the China companies, of the other China providers.
As I said earlier, I did not have any firsthand knowledge about that.
Okay. And this isn't my second question, but is that disturbing to you that that this information wasn't shared to you, especially since it seems like it's potentially pertinent to the issue that was at hand today?
You're right. I think that to the extent that my colleagues had knowledge about this kind of issue that involved something similar to what we voted on today, we both should have had a briefing or an explanation.
Sure, and I agree with that, but I want to be careful as well that I'm not exactly sure. If the presupposition here is that Commissioner Carr specifically knew that there were investigations or proposals, that is something that would alarm me. If Commissioner Carr, like the rest of us, just knows that there are other international 214s that are related to Chinese carriers, that he just says, I think we should also look at those. That is obviously a little bit of a horse of a different color. I don't know what, because again, I don't have any firsthand knowledge of what actually happened.
No, I understand, and that's it. And the other thing I wanted to ask about was just to follow up also on Rettel. Do you foresee, are there any areas, like we've been talking about areas where there's coordination, and do you foresee any potential sort of like that this could slow down the process or anything in any areas, especially we'd already talked a little bit with one of the other commissioners about WRC and and there's also been, as I understand, friction between NTIA and the State Department in quite a few areas. So, but I'm just are there concerns?
Well, it's a serious concern as we head into the World Radio Conference. We've already seen public disputes regarding the 24 gigahertz band and the auction that was started at this agency just a few months ago. We've also seen some disagreement regarding the 37 gigahertz band, which is slated for auction in the future. We're going to need to be in a situation where we better align our federal and commercial spectrum policies as we head into the World Radio Conference. I can't recall ever in the past watching two different arms of an administration get into these kind of public disagreements. It's not helpful for our nation's spectrum policy, and it's embarrassing as we head into this important World Spectrum Conference.
24 and 37 came to my mind as well. And there is, of course, this whole IRAC process where a lot of these issues are supposed to be coordinated. And so where you do see disjointedness and lack of coordination, that is something that is deeply puzzling for those of us that have been public servants for a long time. But I would hope that NTIA is able to further its mission, even though Mr. Rattle has stepped down.
And I would just note that there's already just an acting, in the Spectrum office, it's already an acting person, so they've had some personnel issues there already.
Changing channels to the 833 auction process, I guess I'm wondering, should there be a secondary, from a personal standpoint, a policy standpoint, do you believe there should be a secondary toll-free market in the U.S.? Is that where this agency is going with setting up a secondary market just for 833? Is this the nose in the camel tent, so to speak?
Well, roughly 2 years ago, the agency decided to study toll-free numbers. And we have historically had a command and control kind of approach where we just asked everyone to get in line and first come, first served. Then we acted like there was no secondary market for these numbers. In fact, we prohibited one. But you could go online and do a quick search, and you will find that there is a robust black market where these numbers are bought and sold. So it was reasonable for the agency to say, is there a better way to do this? Are there ways to manage this scarce numbering resource in a way that benefits the public fisc rather than wholly private markets? So the agency decided to do this experiment with the 833 toll-free number. I appreciate that it's a sandbox. We've decided to try this once and see how it goes. My hope is that it's a success, but also that we learn from this process so we can do a better job of managing this resource going forward. And I am hopeful that this is going to go well, and we're going to learn a lot from holding this auction.
But you don't have a specific thought right now on whether, like you said, there's a black market.
Yeah, I think what's become very clear to all of us is that our prohibition on secondary market sales of these numbers has not been successful. The fact that one has thrived despite that prohibition tells you everything you need to know. So I think we've taken notice that that is ongoing and are trying to identify a better way, and this sandbox experiment with the 833 area code is a great way to start.
Yeah, I mean, as I voted for this item today, I'm excited to see where this takes us as well. I don't have any particular thoughts on where to go next from it, but I'm deeply intrigued to see how this works itself out, and I'm hopeful as well.
Great. Yep.
Can you speak to what the importance of having potential licensees based on certification of cyber hygiene practices might mean, not just for cybersecurity, but for protecting U.S. legitimacy abroad with our allies, where we might be perceived as pursuing these actions against Chinese companies from an economic security standpoint?
All right, there's a lot in that question. As we voted on the authorization today, I spent the bulk of my statement talking about broader ideas for making sure that network security is the center of everything we do. As you heard Commissioner Stark say in his statement, the very first sentence of the Communications Act references security responsibilities. We have to take them seriously. It can't just be the performative security of deciding to turn down an authorization that has been sitting in this agency since 2011. We've got to take real steps every day. The first I recommended early this year was that we recharter and reinvigorate the Communication Security Reliability and Interoperability Council. I gave an entire speech where I itemized how we should refocus it on 5G security. I am pleased that the chairman now agrees with me and has decided to do that. I'm even more pleased that we had the leadership of the House Energy and Commerce Committee write us today to ask for just that. The second thing that I called for is that the agency needs to be on the Executive Council of the Department of Homeland Security task force to address communication supply chain security. Its first two reports are coming out shortly. They do not involve commercial markets. We are not focusing on these issues because FCC leadership is not present. We have to fix that. And then finally, with respect to cyber hygiene, that's a term that I'm going to keep using because I think what it reflects is that we have to think on a daily basis about how we should update our policies to reflect the security challenges that our connected world creates. And when it comes to spectrum and licensing, I recommended that every licensee have some obligation to make clear that they are following best practices associated with next-generation wireless security. And I recommended that we take a hard look at the NIST cybersecurity framework to do so. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to make sure that the actors that this agency works with are complying with the best practices that already exist.
One thing that stands out for me, in particular on China Mobile, is starting to think through even on the supply chain side, is making sure that we have a better understanding of where these potential securities are already into our network. We need to find it, we need to fix it, and probably think through the funding part of it as well.
All right. Thank you very much. It's been a long morning and early afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Also, you did. You got the